and welcome back to the Undoctrinate Yourself podcast. Today I have a very special guest for you, a longtime friend, and honestly, in my opinion, a polymath, but I'm going to let him introduce himself because he has his hands in so many different worlds that I really want him to share a little bit about what he does, and then we're going to dive deep on some really amazing science of biomechanics and movement and exercise and all things related to movement, and I think he's going to blow your mind. So welcome, Rua Gilna.
Hey guys, I'm Rua Gilna. You guys might know me as the biomechanist or from my work with Bua Fitness. Yeah, I ruin things for everybody. And then eventually we put them back together and make them good. But we're going to talk a lot about kind of the sacred cows in the fitness industry, the wellness industry, the connections that aren't being made in interdisciplinary integration, and how these things can really help people, kind of where people are falling through the cracks. What I do professionally is I do a lot of personal training, and I work with the Postural Restoration Institute principles, and I work with a lot of people with different neurological issues, disc issues, joint issues, everything from professional athletes through to people with things like Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, and everything in between. So it's a pretty wide gamut that it actually runs. But, and this is what people should know, is that the principles are the same for everybody. Like, if you have a problem, it's not a unique problem. The way we address it, assess it, and everything else is going to be, I'm not going to say algorithmic, but somewhat standardized, as should the approach be. We'll get into that as we go along, because I don't even know how to explain what I do most of the time, to be honest.
I know, exactly. Once you get into the meat of like actually, the assessments, and exactly, can totally depend on the person. But I think it's really important insight too, that there is some form of like a loose algorithm that you can follow when you're assessing people, because it's also, it can be quite isolating when people have issues. They can feel very alone, and like, people can't figure out their problems. Doctors have problems figuring out what's wrong with them. And sometimes a diagnosis can be helpful in that context, within the context of medicine, but within the context of the work that you do, I think it's great because there's like a lot of core tenets that make a human. And if we understand those and how that relates to posture, movement, breath, and all of these things, then you can just really build a strong foundation for physical health.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned the diagnosis there as well. While diagnosis can be super helpful, it can also be a prison for some people. They can kind of identify with that diagnosis. And I see that a lot, especially with joint issues, disc issues, soft tissue tear issues. People look at that and they're like, well, this is who I am now. This is what I've got going on. Instead of, even when you look into the research, there's not a lot of correlation between, end outcomes and initial presentations on scans, findings, etc., or even symptomology. So a lot of times we have people who are identifying, well, I have a herniated disc, so I can't do X, Y, and Z. When in fact, most people are walking around with some form of disc herniation or protrusion or something going on there and don't even know about it. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times the symptomology versus the diagnosis tends to be a little bit maligned. And yeah, that's a huge thing we can talk about.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And a lot of people, like you said, can fall into this trap of their diagnosis, and it becomes like a limiting factor. And so it can both provide comfort and also be a major limitation. So there's like
the language we use is so important.
Yes.
So very important.
Yes, totally. And I think a lot of people can use also that as a crutch. And then also like the diagnostic criteria for a lot of different issues can be so.
Well, a lot of it's symptomatic as opposed to,
exactly. Yes.
It's like you have these symptoms, therefore you have this issue.
Yes.
As opposed to, why do you have these symptoms?
Yes.
But that's a dangerous thing to do.
It actually says nothing about what caused the issues to begin with.
It's just a fancy description.
Yeah, correct.
Which, unfortunately as well, a lot of people who are in the medical system, they've been kind of rolled through it a lot. They understand that the fancy description they've been given is just a descriptor of symptoms and nothing to do with underlying root cause at all.
Exactly. And then of course that really negatively impacts the treatment process, because now you're treating the
managing
symptoms.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Exactly. Great. So I mean, I think this is a great introduction. So maybe we can just dive in a little bit. So Rua said that he works with PRI, Postural Restoration Institute, quite a bit. And maybe we can just introduce by talking about what is posture, because I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions.
Let's talk about, the Postural Restoration Institute, first of all, is probably the biggest influence on how I train. And they don't specifically cater to trainers, but if you go in there and take the stuff and you're an intelligent person, you do a lot of work, you can go and apply it. So what posture is, what posture isn't. What people think posture is holding yourself in a given position. All right, that, first of all, there is no good posture to be stuck in. If you're stuck, and that's a bad thing. It's going to limit options in terms of movement, in terms of, we'll get into all the other stuff later, but let's just say in terms of movement for now. Now, if you're a lucky person, you might have no symptoms and no problems with that whatsoever your whole life, or at least none that you can feel, none that you can sense. But posture is not a position. Posture is literally a description of the relation of joints to other joints and other appendicular structures. That's it. So we could talk about posture and say the relationship of a humerus to a rib cage, a scapula to a rib cage. That's posture. So people who say posture doesn't matter, that's like saying orthopedics don't matter whatsoever. It's absolutely insane. Of course, posture matters. Now, that said, the idea that we're going to hold ourselves in this position, which is very prevalent in the fitness industry, if you look at how people lift, everything's a big arch chest up to protect the low back. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
What we need most people to have is the ability to get to and then out of all normative ranges of motion that a human can do. If you can do those things, chances are you're going to have a lot less issues. Again, just because you're limited doesn't mean you're going to spontaneously combust. This is not a nocebo situation here where we're going to say, oh my God, if you can't do this, you're going to die, you're going to explode. No. But your likelihood of getting injured in certain activities is definitely higher. Your power transfer is probably lower. If you're a runner, your gait efficiency and stride efficiency is lower. It doesn't matter what you want to do. You're going to suck at it much more if you don't have the ability to use these reciprocal alternating motions, get to and from normal ranges of motion. A very simple practical salient example will be, can you get shoulder flexion? Can you get an arm overhead without using a rib cage to get it there? If you can't, you probably suck at overhead pressing. You probably suck at overhead activities. You're probably not a good climber or not as good as you could be. Take your pick from anything overhead. It doesn't matter whatever you want to do. Putting high shit on shelves, it's not going to be fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe so. Like you mentioned, it's posture isn't holding yourself in a specific pattern. So that brings up the really important point of like the PRI approach is really to rewrite the unconscious patterns in the nervous system to allow the body to then select those as the most efficient pathways.
Exactly that. So this is kind of, again, a misconception about what PRI does. Everyone thinks it's an orthopedic, muscular focused institute. It's not at all. They introduce things that way so that people have something to anchor the algorithms to and anchor the approach to that already fits their current existing model. But at the end of the day, I've seen guys come in with arms the size of legs. Like they have, tree trunk, 20-inch arms, competitive bodybuilders. And I put them in certain positions and ask them to do like a tricep exercise, just a regular elbow extension with like a 5 or 7 pound dumbbell, and they can't do it. Just because you have a large muscle, it doesn't mean that muscle is neurologically efficient in all positions that we need to be an athletic, variable human who can do all those movements. I know it sounds a lot like word salad right now. The TLDR version of it is you can be big and strong, but if your brain doesn't know how to use your muscles in concert efficiently, you're not going to work well. It's that simple. All the sum of the parts can be actually less than the whole. You know what I mean? That's what you see in a lot of people. I'm not picking on any particular sports, but bodybuilders are a good example of being muscular focused as opposed to movement focused. I mean, if you're going to be an athlete, and all humans should be athletes to an extent, whatever that means to you, you should be able to go check the mail. You should be able to climb, run, jump. If you're 70, you should still be able to run. Obviously, accepting crazy medical issues. But there's no reason we should get to that point and be completely falling apart the way most of us are. And we all have an example of someone in our life who's a little bit older, who's super fit and healthy, and as an example to everybody else. Again, we can't control everything, but we can stack the deck in our favor. And when we see people, I know I'm going a bit of a tangent here, as I tend to, but when we see people, particularly in that geriatric population, take a fall, you always see them fall forward and sideways because they can't adduct the femur. And that goes bringing a leg across midline. And that goes back to, if you don't have this variability, eventually the risk may catch up to you. So it is. That's PRI's whole thing. Again, it's movement patterning via the brain. We'll get that when things are sensed to be safe and sensed to be efficient. When the fitness people grab hold of anything, they tend to fucking ruin it. I'm gonna curse, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, it's gonna be a long day. Yeah, they tend to ruin it. Everything they do, they latch onto it and they bastardize it in a monkey see, monkey do situation. That's what we've seen with some of the PRI stuff when the fitness people grab hold of it. I'm saying this as a primarily fitness person, by the way. But I'll see people doing 1990 with their heels up on a bench. And 1990 is to teach your feet how to interact with the floor. It's not about using hamstrings, but they're just looking at it through the lens of, oh, hamstrings work here, therefore it's a hamstring exercise. That's not what it is. It's an exercise giving us proprioceptive feedback, enough things touching the body and the body applying forces similar to how it should be when we're standing. And then progress that from an isometric, just a muscular hold in different contexts to then eventually get to a standing alternating movement. And now all of a sudden we can start bringing levels of athletics or weightlifting or performance at, again, a slow level and then build back up. What people screw it up is they go, okay, I did a 1990, okay, I can pass the movement tests. You let me go do a max squat. It's fucking stupid. That's like saying, okay, I understand how a backflip works. Let me go backflip on the concrete now. Oh, it didn't work. That's weird. Like Darwin has a warrant out for these people. It blows my mind every time the leaps of logic people can make with this. Oh, the thing I did for 30, 90 seconds didn't change every single thing about how my brain works and how movement patterns happen. So odd. It's literally a different movement if you change muscles involved. So of course it's going to take a while to build back up, It's silly.
Totally. And I know, like, because I've worked with Rua extensively on my own postural, imbalances that I've had for a long time. And just for some backstory, I had a lot of knee pain when I was a kid and through high school. And I always thought it was just because I was obese and like I was just screwed and gonna have knee pain forever. But with working with Rua, I found out that I was basically stuck in this extension pattern, and we'll get into that, what that means. But essentially my knees were hyperextending all the time and had some issues with my pelvis dumping forward, feet flat. There's like this pattern that you can identify in a lot of people. And so essentially I'm like always falling forward when I was, younger. And so he prescribed me specific techniques to undo those learned motor patterns and learn new patterns, but it happened in a progressive way. So it's not like he said, you're not progressing just straight to like a standing under load, because something you're
just going to default to once there's threat perceived, and if you're losing heavy weight, it's threatening.
Yes.
Anybody who's ever been under a very heavy weight will tell you it's very threatening. We're going to revert to what's deemed to be safest and deemed to be most efficient, because your body wants to be lazy and doesn't want to die. Those are its primary mandates.
Yes.
So, and you already hinted at it. What we do is we take these things, these new patterns, and we integrate them into exercises. It's not that you shouldn't be weightlifting, or you shouldn't be doing resistance training. Everyone should be doing resistance training. And I know you've had Gab on here before, Gab Lyons as well. I 100% agree with her. Everyone should be building muscle mass. Muscle is one of the biggest predictors of like all-cause mortality. If we can have more muscle mass, we reduce that all-cause mortality. That said, we can overdevelop musculature. Now, it'll probably still help us in terms of all-cause mortality, but it may not help us in athleticism, or it may not help us in quality of life later if we're athletes or someone like to do a lot of movement. I would just have that little granular difference between the two. I 100% agree with Gab. We need to build muscle mass. Everyone does. We're under-muscled. But we can be a little bit smarter about it. The fitness industry is a young industry. It's very, very young. It's very, very anti-intellectual. It likes to just completely ignore everything that's not the sacred cow of how things have been done. I've talked about this a little bit before, I've done drug-free bodybuilding. I love powerlifting. Those are two of the worst sports for humans to do if they're trying to be athletic, healthy humans. And people sometimes get pissed off at me about this. The fitness industry owes a debt of gratitude to those two sports, because they are essentially the foundation of the whole industry. But I've never met an athlete who said, who I want to move like? A powerlifter. And I guess it's not me ragging on powerlifters. They're dedicated athletes that work their asses off. But Joe Normal, who goes to the gym, has a little bit of back pain and wants to lose some weight, get strong and look good naked. He doesn't need to be walking around with a pelvis dumped forward, arched back like this in a couple of years and have blown out shoulders and blown out knees, which are just standard in powerlifting. And again, it's just the sport is lifting or pushing people to the maximum for a single rep. The risk versus reward for a gen pop person, it's just not there. Like the reward's not there. So why are we training people that way? It makes zero sense. Same thing for bodybuilders. They look fantastic, hard work. I've competed there before. It's great. But I did not feel good. Like I was walking around at 205 pounds at 5'10", jacked, lean. I felt like a rhinoceros. Like I didn't move well. I couldn't move well. I was getting out of breath when I shouldn't. But we'll get into all the why of that later. Again, there's nothing wrong with building muscle mass. What we can do is we can do that in a way that is conducive towards athleticism instead of detrimental to it. And that's the evolution. It's the next step the fitness industry has to take. And the steps and all the bits there, they're in the literature, but just we haven't caught up to the literature right close. And you know that from every field, basically.
Totally. A lot of times it really takes quite a bit of time to get science into practice. And it can be a major disservice for sure when we're thinking about, especially in fields that are interacting with people and like influencing their lives directly in medicine and athletics. But actually, speaking of that, like athleticism, would you be able to just give us a short definition of what does it mean to be athletic?
100%. So I've revised this in my head a million times, and I end up with this very simple explanation. To me, athleticism is not the ability to generate power, because again, we can use the powerlifter. They can generate a lot of power. Can you generate, preserve, and transfer power well and efficiently? That's it. Simple, right? How are we going to measure that? Can you get it from bottom left limbs, top right hand, for example? That means we have to have some level of rotational competency. Easy. Right now, it's easy to say. It's not easy to do because we have to be able to do things like dissociate a sternum and sacrum, create pressure differentials and pelvises and rib cages and that sort of stuff. And what I always like to say about this is, again, if you move back into the kind of fitness realm, people talk about bracing and squeezing and, Valsalva maneuvers for a squat, like squeezing against the belt or whatever. If you ever played any sport, nobody fucking does that. Nobody goes, let me go for this Duncan. That's absolutely insane. Like, okay, I'm going to go for this uppercut. No, we're going to lose all our speed, all of our elasticity, all the power output, all the transfer. Sure, you might get good power generation, but is it ending up in that hand? Is it ending up in the bat? Is it ending up in the ball? No, it's been fucking wasted. We're absorbing into soft tissue, into bones, into joints, and actually just into tiring ourselves out and limiting our own movement. It's just, we want people to be reflexively athletic, and that's a very, very big thing. And that's the thing that people miss about PRI. The end goal is not to have someone pass table tests. It's when they wake up in the morning, they have the ability to pass those table tests across the board, and they can go and do their activity with better efficiency and safety than beforehand. It's not, oh, no, never lift weights, never do that, never go back to your activity. It's, I want you to be a fully functioning human being. That doesn't mean you're 100% symmetric. It means you're a human being who can get out of positions, get into positions. You can create mirrored asymmetry on both sides and get out of it. That's it. That shouldn't be a contentious thing to talk about, but people get very much in their feelings about it. Usually without any significant logic, and it ends up being like ad hominem stuff. But I like that. That's fun for me.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's very easy to destroy those types of arguments. So, or just completely ignore them because it's not worth your time to engage.
Depends on my mood.
Either way, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, either way. But yeah, so I think that's really important insight. And so with regards to PRI and with regards to your work with clients, what kind of people do you typically see coming to you? Is it mostly people in pain, or I'm sure it's a wide range of types of people. Could you like expand on that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Like, let's just say this week, for example, I'm looking at my calendar. If you don't mind me being rude for a moment. Looks like a head like a colander. So let's say this week I had, so one of my clients actually just last night, I helped him with his back issues. He's a professional MMA fighter. I worked with him, and then I was in Colorado recently, and I managed to catch up with him while I was there. He just won a championship fight last night, but he'd been off for essentially a year. He couldn't fight because of his back pain.
Wow.
I'd been through the physical therapy mill, all the stuff, 3 times a week, whatever, nothing. All the stretches and ice and heat and manual therapy you can think of. Took us one session, his pain was gone. And then we progressed. We still have a way to go in terms of progressing the S&C, but we went after 3 or 4 sessions in the in-person. We progressed to a basic strength and conditioning program. Went back and just smashed the shit out of the guy, TKO'd him in the first round.
Amazing.
Like, I'm not taking credit for the man's athleticism or martial arts capabilities. He's a phenomenal athlete already. We went from a year off and unable to come back. And, when we're talking about a competitive fighter, you have a limited window in which to make your mark and make your money and be a champ. And he's a young guy. It's so, for me, having the fighting background, it's so nice to be able to give people what I didn't have and what I needed back then. So that's a big thing for me. Then let's see. So that was Saturday. Friday, I had actually someone that you referred to me who had gastric reflux, or acid reflux. And his acid reflux is almost gone.
Wow, that's amazing.
Like one session.
Wow.
Like we did one intro call in one session. Then I had someone with a complex respiratory pain thing on Thursday evening. I had a collegiate baseball guy in the afternoon. Like it runs the gamut, really does, between like chronically injured people with brain injuries, TBIs, to professional athletes and everything in between. Sometimes I'll have like some of my jiu-jitsu guys are here. Other times it might be just like a referral, and it's literally just a stay-at-home mom who's got ankle issues, and she tried to sort them out for years. It's a wild gamut. I love it though.
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
Totally.
But the principles of assessment and progression are the same for everybody. It's just about how far you want to go with it, and what the demands that are being put on your body, and how complex the issue you have is. That's it. That's the only real difference. And I'm not saying everybody fits neatly into a little category or bucket, but I also really despise the ambiguity that is in the fitness industry of this. Well, everybody's body is different. Yeah, everybody's body is different. And there are some people who are very different, but the vast majority of people have pretty similar issues. And that's going to hurt someone's feelings. I don't really care. Typically when people, get upset about this sort of stuff, I'll ask them, well, how many people do you do like a full body movement assessment on? I'm like, well, I don't do that. I'm like, then you don't get to have an opinion. If you haven't tested hundreds and hundreds of people, why do you have an opinion on the movement capabilities? You're just eyeballing it. Amazing. Nice empirical evidence there.
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's a lot of wisdom that comes with working with people. Like a lot of times it's easy to intellectualize things if you're just learning from a textbook or,
Yep.
even just taking a course. But once you start working with people, you see patterns emerging, and then that really builds your ability to be able to connect dots between different people and come up with solutions that could be across the board helpful in a lot of cases, which is super helpful. You mentioned something about manual therapy, and it reminded me that I always remember when you talked about manual therapy with me and my partner Keith when we were first initially coming to see you, and I really liked your perspective on it as like kind of an addition, but it's not really a long-term solution. And if you could just explain why, I think that would be very interesting for the listeners.
I think it's important at this juncture as well to say that I don't specialize in acute injuries. Chronic long-term injuries are what I'm very good with. I can help with acute injuries, but there are people who are better than me at that. So in that context, what I'm saying is that sometimes the manual therapy can be super helpful in acute injury. It's not my thing. When you're doing manual therapy, when you're getting someone in there working on the tissues, replacing appendicular structures, whatever you're doing, doesn't matter. What you're primarily doing is changing position and you're inhibiting muscles. When you're making things long, other things short. You're inhibiting something, giving something leverage. But the problem there is there's no motor pattern being developed associated with that. So manual therapy on its own as a treatment, it's like me saying, I'm going to learn piano for you.
Yep.
And I'm over here, I'm playing piano. I know how to play piano. It's beautiful. I don't. I have absolute farmer hands. So I'm playing piano here beautifully. And then I'm like, okay, your turn. And you're like, you keep playing it. And it ends up with this kind of like, and again, I'm not trying to throw any profession under the bus here, but there's a lot of professions end up people always having to rely upon them. My whole thing and the whole thing of PRI, and this is one of the things that drew to me, is they want you to be self-sufficient and be able to just be done with them. They want you to be discharged as a patient or as a client. Now, very often we have someone go from rehab and they want to go to strength and conditioning. I tell them, hey, you don't need me for rehab anymore. If you want to stay for S&C, that's fine, but let's delineate that pretty significantly so you know. Yeah, it blows my mind so often how people get stuck in this physical therapy wheel where they're getting ice, stim, physical therapy assistant, 2 exercises, and maybe a little bit of manual work, and they never get better. I have yet to see a single human, and I say this with all the hopes that I never do, where in a single session we can't make specific, measurable, empirical change to their movement qualities and abilities, and also subjectively sensed as well. They get up and like, oh wow, this feels different without cueing, without me priming them to say anything.
I feel like this is a fractal also of like modern medicine in some ways. I recently heard somebody say this, and I can't quite remember who the quote was from, but they're basically saying like when you go to a doctor, you're seeking like a treatment, and but if you go out to dinner with a friend and they say they're treating you, you assume they're paying. So it's like if you're going to a doctor, it's almost felt as if they're doing the work for you.
Yes.
They're giving you the solution, and you have to do nothing.
That would be beautiful if that actually worked. Yeah. Unfortunately, in the real world, that's not how brains work.
Yeah.
And that's another thing kind of that the fitness industry, not just the fitness industry, sports in general don't understand how motor patterning happens. Like how movement engrams are queued up, how like if I see this microphone, my brain queues up every single thing I can do with the microphone. Like I was like, I could pick it up, I could throw it, I could talk into it, I could twiddle the knobs, I could throw it through the window, and then your brain goes, okay, cool, that's great. Which one of those is the most appropriate task? Do that one. That's it. That's how the brain does things. If it doesn't have a list of appropriate tasks or a list of different strategies to accommodate those tasks, then it just does the only thing it can do. And that's the same thing with movements, same thing with sports. Like there are those assholes, lucky people who just look at something once and nail it. Those are people who chose their parents well, didn't have head trauma, didn't have emotional trauma, and they were built to be athletes. And I'm not hating on them much because I have a big leg up in terms of genetics with competitive athletic parents, but they tend to have this survivorship bias in terms of how they present things. If you do this, you'll get this. That's just not how it works. You're born an athlete. Now, if you're a born athlete, you can fuck it up and become unathletic, but you cannot become genetically athletic. It's not fair. That doesn't mean you can't become super athletic, but there are some people and they will just be born with a greater potential for athleticism, whether that's neurological, like just resiliency. When we talk about the individual differences in bodies, when you have the facets in a joint, you have certain people, for example, who have less or more facets in a joint, which will give them either better mobility across that joint or better stability across that joint. So if you have someone who wants to be a competitive powerlifter, the more facets they have in a joint, the less likely they are to rupture or injure that joint when they're lifting a heavy load. They're going to be pretty shitty at yoga, though, or pretty shitty at dance. Like They're not going to be swanning around the stage in, production of the Nutcracker. It's just not going to happen. And those are the things that, again, the fitness industry is just really bad at identifying, and it lies about them all the time. Yoga and dance give you long, lean muscles. No, genetics give you long, lean muscles. I can't turn a zebra into a unicorn. I can't turn a horse into a zebra. They're different animals. The way you're built is the way you're built. No, we can make you the best, most beautiful, amazing version of that, but we can't change what you are. And that's an unpopular opinion. Like, you see someone, I want to look like this guy. Well, you're not. It's not going to happen. I use myself as an example. One of my clients asked me, if I bench so much, how come I don't have big pecs? I was like, first of all, fuck you, that hurt. Ouch. I was like, second of all, because my pec insertions are just, I have like a 4-inch pec. It goes from here to here. That's all it is. It's never going to be a big, thick basketball pec. Like one of my buddies, he's just got these like half basketballs in his chest. I'm stronger than him, but he's just got crazy pecs. I'll never have that because I'm not genetically built to have it. I'll still outperform him in most sports, even just directly benching. But it is what it is.
Mm-hmm. There's also an important distinction that maybe a lot of people don't make when they're thinking about their goals with regards to athletics, is like aesthetics versus functionality, and like what your actual goal is, because some goals are going to be more sustainable than others and actually allow you to reach them versus something that's very like superficial. You may not actually stick with it because you don't really have the motivation at a deep level.
And especially if it's something that's very superficial and is very difficult.
Yeah.
I'd rather someone have a program that's not super difficult, that's very adherable. The only program that's any use to anybody is one that's adherable. So I have some clients and they do 30 minutes 3 times a week, and they get bigger and they get stronger because they go in there like a sniper. They're so focused for that 30 minutes and they get out. It doesn't have to be this horrible, super technical thing. I tell everybody the first week or two you do anything with me, it's going to be the most pedantic, annoying week or two of training in your life if you've already trained, because you have to unlearn all the shit that you do wrong. If you've never trained, you're going to be like, what's the whole fuss about? This is easy. That's all it is. Like, I always laugh. I always laugh about all this stuff. It's very frustrating when you see the direction the industry goes consistently. It's like the entire industry has ADHD. Mm-hmm. It's like, ooh, what's new? What's shiny? Ooh, here's a Swiss ball, or here's like a massage ball. Okay, here's a vibrating massage ball. All right, cool. I was in when it comes to like foam rolling, SMR, all this sort of stuff. If you look at like the mathematics involved of the force necessary to deform scar tissue, for example, or deform fascia, you basically break your leg before you did it with actual SMR. So everything we're getting is a neurological change. The same people will then tell you that neurological change will have nothing to do with movement patterns. Like there's no consistency or logic within the industry in terms of how we treat anything. It's an absolute sham. And the people who speak the loudest are usually the least prone to actually examining their own statements and biases. I tell everybody, if you have a problem with something that I say, cool. If you have a mechanistic explanation or research, I'm down to listen. I'm always open to changing my opinion. If you're not open to changing your opinion, fuck off and don't talk to me. Or don't try to discuss something. That's fine. But that works in relationships as well. It's not just in work or fitness or anything else. There's no point in discussing anything with anybody if you're both set in your ways already. All you can do is see who yells loudest, who gets frustrated fastest.
Absolutely. I also see a fractal of that again in medicine, where it's like we're kind of distracted with the new shiny things, and we're completely ignoring the basic foundation principles of being healthy.
Oh my God.
Like getting outside, getting good sleep, making sure you're eating a nutritious diet, moving your body.
I think we maybe discussed it recently. Personally, they're trialing like weight loss shots for like 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, instead of being like, stop feeding them so much and get them fucking moving. Like, talk about missing the forest for the trees. Why are we not doing education programs for parents and schools? Schools in particular, there's like a very big opportunity for improvement there. If we can teach the schools, or teach the parents, the teachers, the kids how to actually eat well and that sort of stuff. And before we get into like the economics of things and why it's sometimes difficult to eat well, we could still be having them do more physical activity in school.
Yep.
Make it a habit from the get-go.
And I mean, the school lunches, and some schools offer breakfast too. It's like literally donuts, garbage, fried food, like trash. Yep. And so like in that way, it makes sense. Oh, we're not teaching them how to eat healthy because it is.
All the kids get the munchies all the time.
Apparently. And I mean, it's also addictive stuff too. So, and it also kind of numbs you out to the nuances of like real food, the flavors of real food, because you're just used to these bold, like sugar, salt. Yes.
Yeah. Sugar and fat in the same food, which you don't really see in nature.
Yes.
It's like crack.
It is. It is. I'd love to. So we have a lot of topics we want to cover. So let's get into something, because we can just keep going on tangents. Like every time we hang out, it's always like hours of conversation and it's endless. So, but I'd really like to talk about something that really blew my mind when I first started working with you, which was that there's like these different fractal patterns in the different parts of the body that mirror each other, and they both also directly influence each other as well. So would you be able to illuminate some of those and like how they kind of
100%.
work together?
So this is one that people have disagreed with me and argued with me so many times about this, and yet again, it's presented in the literature. Some of the stuff has been talked about like since the early 1900s and stuff like the Gray's Anatomy. Like I have one of the older Gray's Anatomies. They talk about this stuff. But when it hurts feelings, people tend to just ignore literature. Excuse me. So let's say like the foot, the arch of your foot, the dome of your foot will typically mirror the arching of the pelvic floor, which will mirror the arching of the thoracic or respiratory diaphragm, which will mirror the arching of a hemipalate of the mouth. So everyone's like, that's insane. Like, first of all, it's not that insane. Literally one thing that's connected. So of course, applying torque or torsion to one side will have a knock-on effect. Second of all, of course it will. It's just like if you actually look at mechanistically, let's say, for example, someone with an anterior pelvic tilt, right? If you have anterior pelvic tilt, for those who don't know, if this is my pelvis, this is not sponsored by Fresca, I promise. If I would tip the Fresca logo to the front, this is the front of my body, that's an anterior tilt. Tip it under, posterior tilt. So if you're spilling it at the back, spilling it towards your posterior, then anterior, front, back. Okay. If you do an anterior tilt, what we'll see also is the back will arch to keep your center of mass backwards. Okay. As that happens, the rib cage will get circumferentially bigger. You guys see those bodybuilders, the powerlifters, again, I'm not shitting on you, but it's necessary to look big sometimes is to have a big rib cage. Okay. When we do that, because diaphragms are like every muscle, they're not infinite in length. As we get circumferentially bigger, the diaphragm, which lives inside the rib cage, gets stretched. When you inhale, it can now no longer descend. Right? So then your choices, and we've talked about this before, your choices are either don't breathe anymore, which we'll call plan B, or a very short-term choice, or find a new way to breathe. And we do that neck breathing. It becomes SCMs, upper traps, and this big elevation of the rib cage. Now, what's going to happen with that is obviously flattened out the thoracic diaphragm. What we're also going to have is we're going to have a system that's not now driving pressure down on a pelvis. So what should happen when you inhale is thoracic diaphragm or respiratory diaphragm drops down, pushes organs, viscera, intestines, all the good stuff down. Then we have the pelvic floor, which drops down in concert with that to allow them to not distend forward. As you exhale, they come back up. Boop, 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 boop. Right? That's what should happen in the ideal person. Now, when we have the person whose diaphragm is flat, they're big and long, that will be accompanied by a pelvis that rolls forward and externally rotates each hemipelvis as well, which will basically flatten out that pelvic floor. Now it can no longer ascend. Right? Now, some people are going, I don't fucking care. I don't give a shit about diaphragms. I feel fantastic. All right, cool. If this is how I sell this to everybody, this is real though, I promise. If you like good orgasms, your pelvic floor needs to work. If you want good orgasms, that means your thoracic diaphragm has to work first.
Listen up, folks.
Right? If you don't like good orgasms, we have nothing to talk about. I don't know. I don't understand where you're coming from as a person. Fuck you. I hope you're having a great asexual life. Evolution has a warrant there for you. I don't know what to say. I'm sure someone's getting insulted out. I'm just joking though. So yeah, you'll have things like someone's got a pelvic floor dysfunction. They might have incontinence when they sneeze, when they run, a lot of pressure, particularly postpartum for women. For men, as they reach their 30s, 40s, and I've seen some athletes I've worked with in their 20s, not anyone I've mentioned before he yells at me. It's not someone who I've talked about already today. Otherwise the MMA fighter is going to be so mad at me. I love you, man. It's not you. I'm telling them. But other athletes I've worked with in their 20s who are, big weightlifters, and they have pelvic floor dysfunction so bad that they have erectile dysfunction. And like, that's the point where all the guys listening are go, wait, what? I'm like, yeah. If you want good erections, your pelvic floor needs to have appropriate blood flow and not be stretched long all the time. So also just the mechanics of sex, if you can't tuck a pelvis and then untuck it, you're probably not getting it done the way you should be getting it done. I don't want to get too much into the anatomy of that, but you're probably not doing a good job of what you should be doing. Or at the very least, not a very efficient job. That's all we'll say there. But we have this long Tangent done. We have this long thoracic diaphragm that can't drop down, this pelvic floor that can't drop down. As that happens, we'll get that external rotation of the femurs, and what that will do as well is we'll drive weight. The center of mass will go forward, basically, as the rib cage comes up like this, and the weight will shift to the toes, allowing the arches to collapse. So it's not just a magic fucking connection. We can go muscle by muscle, joint by joint, and talk about the relationships between these structures. It's not just a super magic crazy thing. And that's kind of what I would like people to understand. As we talk about, for example, this SCM connection as they pull up, that's going to change the hemipalate of the mouth, because it's going to change how temporal bones move, how mandibles move, how the sphenoid bone back here moves. And talking about fractals, if you pull up a picture of a sphenoid, which is like a bone back in here, looks the same as a pelvis. It basically is the same structure, but like miniaturized. This chamber and this chamber are interrelated, and they're also analogous to one another, same as up here. The flat bones, the temporal bones, look like your scapulae, but just rotated back, which look like your innominate bones at the side of your hips. We're just chambers and diaphragms creating, that's all we are. We're basically like meat balloons tied together with a computer.
Very sexy description.
It's a very sexy description. Meat balloons tied together with a computer, but most people's computers are missing the adequate software to actually make them run appropriately. That's all. Their air intakes are fucked. Anyone who builds PCs will enjoy that one.
That's so helpful. And so you mentioned something about, well, that triggered me to want to ask about like pressure generation, because I know it's something we talked about extensively. And you mentioned also the relationship between the diaphragm dropping and the pelvic floor dropping, and you're basically massaging the internal organs. So could you talk about that a little bit?
So we talk about like lymphatic drainage.
Yeah.
We talk about waste product removal. We talk about peristaltic action, chewing. We talk about our parallels. Chewing is peristaltic action. We're causing contraction on one side, releasing the other side, compression, decompression, compression, decompression. Nobody chews on both sides together like this. That'd be fucking weird. If you do that, you're weird. Sorry. Or you're a horse or something. I don't know. Even a horse do the whole like circular.
Yeah, they like circular. Yeah.
Yeah, go see somebody. I don't know what your problem is. So when we have this like back and forward compression action, we should be getting, it's very easy to envision that when we chew. That's what should be happening with ground reaction force when your heels hit the floor. We should be, as one heel hits the floor, dropping to that side and bringing our center of mass over that, which will give us a compressed thorax. The rib and hips will move together, and the other side, an expanded thorax. That will give us a peristalsis, like a chewing type motion in the intestines. We're pumping, basically. We're pumping fluids, we're pumping food through there. If you have IBS, diverticulitis, Crohn's, any of these issues, reflux issues, if you can't pump, if you can't tuck, if you can't get out of these big extension patterns, you're probably going to have more inflammation, more issues than you should. Talk about waste removal. We could talk about cerebrospinal fluid pumping. These things are important. I know you've got a way further down the list, but Parkinson's.
Yeah.
Parkinson's is the inability to pump, the inability to oscillate. And I know somebody's going to get real insulted by that. Parkinson's is a basal ganglia disease, similar to Huntington's, where you have dopamine symmetry. Now, I'm not going to comment on the underlying causes of Parkinson's. There are many, but I work with Parkinson's patients, you know this. And what you typically see in Parkinson's patients, which is very interesting to me, is that when you give them a rhythmic activity, they actually lose their symptoms. So with Parkinson's people, they play music. They can still play the music. They can still sing. They can still dance. They can ride a bike. In fact, they can even emulate somebody else's gait. If they watch somebody else walk, they can typically do it with no tremors. And what we should get, if you're a normal, healthy human being, is when we walk down the street, my brain goes, okay, swing the right leg. Yeah. Little high five. Okay, left leg. Little high five, because we have dopamine asymmetry, right? It's giving you a little micro reward for each movement that you make. Now, when the dopamine becomes symmetric, when neither side is giving us reward, now we have hesitation. Neither side has an impetus to move first. When we have extrinsic sources of rhythm, that's gone. We don't have to make that decision anymore because we know what we should be doing. So when we talk about the inability to pump, the inability to oscillate, the inability to vibrate, I genuinely mean this. If you're a big, rigid, stable human being, you're physiologically, emotionally, cognitively, and neurologically rigid as well. Rigid things will break. If you're a lucky human being, you may never have any follow-on issues from this. But most people aren't that lucky. It's usually a long enough time scale before something comes up. Again, I'm not trying to do this to nocebo anybody and make them think they're going to spontaneously combust. But we got to play things and kind of weight the deck in our favor. Make as many things as we can in our favor so that as we approach late life, end of life, or for some people, they don't even get to push it out that far. They start having these issues quite young. So we got to do what we can to vibrate. And what do we mean by vibrate? Oscillate, be loose, look at an athlete. Usain Bolt is one of my favorite athletes of all time, right? Not because they really give a shit about sprinting. It's kind of cool. But you see that guy walk up the start line. He is so relaxed. He doesn't have a care in the world. That is what an athlete should look like. Look at the best athletes of all time. You see, so look at Mike Tyson, right? Mike Tyson can be rigid when he needs to be. But when he can create so much force and power and be so rigid and explosive. But then afterwards, when he's just moving, he's loose. Look at LeBron. I know that now some people are LeBron haters. Look at MJ. Look at Jordan. The man was explosive then loose. Just being stuck in a rigid position, this is where we go back to powerlifters, bodybuilders. That's why they're not athletic. If powerlifters could get rid of that rigidity and then bring it back just as fast, they'd be the best athletes in the world, because pound for pound, they're probably the strongest, them and Olympic lifters. But that's not the case. We need to be able to dismiss rigidity. And again, without being hippy-dippy and ambiguous about it, physiological rigidity has knock-on hormonal effects that will give us cognitive and emotional rigidity as well. I say it's quite a bit of experience of having my head messed with TBIs and concussions and stuff. So I know that's a tangent which kind of actually took us later on in the thing, but
it's very totally fine. Relevant. Yeah, it's very relevant. And I think it's super interesting to think about the relationship between psychological or mental rigidity, emotional rigidity, and the physical body too. And I mean, you can also think about it from the context of like the nervous system is innervating all of your, your muscles that are facilitating your movement. So if you have a nervous system that's not able to be flexible and, come up with, new patterns or new ways of thinking psychologically, that's going to be also reflected at the nervous system and just your peripheral nervous system, because it's all the same. So I think that's also interesting. I think there's probably a genetic component too, which we've talked about before, but just people's ability to make new neural connections and generate new patterns. Like some people, I'm sure we've talked about this before, but like some people will learn really quickly. Like when you're doing PRI with them, they'll see the results like very quickly and they'll stick.
Makes my life so easy.
Yeah. And then other people, it's like you need more and more repetition because their nervous systems are just maybe from traumas, maybe from physical or emotional traumas. Like for one reason,
the threat is perceived so high.
Yes, exactly.
You just can't let go.
Yes, exactly. So are there any techniques or tools that I don't know if we've talked about this before actually, but anything that you've used that can help expedite that process in people who are more have more stubborn nervous systems?
There's a couple of things. I think the biggest thing is, and this is going to sound like the least helpful advice ever, is to, instead of coming into this going, again, this is why I talked about kind of the muscular focus that some people have on this. Excuse me. Don't go into it with I have to work hard, I have to feel this muscle. Instead go, I have to sense. I don't like using ambiguous terms. I have to sense this, what I'm told to sense. I have to find a way to sense that, a position where I can sense that. And then I have to surrender. That's it. I have to surrender to this feeling that this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. Because what you're supposed to be doing, what you're used to doing, what's comfortable and what's home to you is likely contributing to your issues. So you have to lean into novelty. You have to perturb your current patterns. And that means very literally stepping outside your comfort zone. It means getting there and just surrendering, succumbing to the new sensations, the novelty, not trying to create this rigidity and protect yourself. Let yourself fucking wobble. If I see someone doing a technique and they're, I'm like, great. You're not trying to over secure yourself. Your brain is not saying, this is so unsafe, we have to stop. So for some people, I think you probably will see me do it with a couple people that you see me work with. I'll start off and I won't give them the whole technique in the first show. No chance. I will give them one component of the technique. For the first technique, I teach some people, especially those who are like a little more neurologically fragile or physiologically fragile. I'm going to take 35, 40 minutes to teach them one technique. And I'll build it up in small pieces and they feel safer and better and safer each time. If I try to get them to do it all at once, it'll be a clusterfuck. They just wouldn't be able to do it. They'd get pissed off. They wouldn't have that sense of success as well. They would automatically distrust me. They would distrust themselves, the technique. We have to make people feel safe when they see any medical provider. I'm not a medical provider directly, but I do obviously work perimedically. They have to feel safe when they work with anybody. It's just that simple. If you don't make someone feel safe, if you don't let yourself feel safe, you're not going to do well. Doing this stuff in a very busy gym can be super tough for that reason. If someone has like TBIs or is very neurologically fragile, that's why I'd rather have someone in a living room where they're comfortable, lying on the floor. They feel a little bit silly, but they don't feel judged by all the random people watching them do the thing.
Totally. I actually think this is a really nice bridge into talking about like nervous system regulation and like parasympathetic versus sympathetic, because like I think you kind of alluded to that just now, that if you're stuck in a more sympathetic state, whether that's from like some trauma that you experienced years ago or something that happened recently, or you're in a crowded gym and you feel judged or whatever, like you're not getting into that more parasympathetic state in your nervous system, and that's going to impair your ability to like actually invoke learning and memory at like a neurochemical level.
So how I describe this to people I work with all the time, and we can talk about the different binaries in a moment, but when we get into an overly sympathetic state, which the modern world is perfectly designed to put us into, it's not, you haven't failed. If you're stressed out all the time in the modern world, you haven't failed. Your environment is out to get you. We have like all these invisible lines everywhere. But we talk about motor learning, we talk about changing a long-term pattern. If you don't feel secure, if you don't feel safe, if I'm being chased by a lion or a tiger, learning a new skill is not top of my fucking brains list. It doesn't give a shit. Okay, cool. You want to do calculus? Tiger's going to fucking eat you. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the time. We have to be in a position where we're safe to learn. That also counts for emotionally safe as well. I don't know how many different learning environments I've been in where someone's being a fucking asshole and immediately people just tune out. We have to engage people at a level where they feel safe to ask questions, where they feel safe to be wrong, where they don't feel judged for that. And again, this goes far beyond what we're talking about here. It goes to martial arts, it goes to dance, it goes to music, it goes to relationships. You can't put someone in a position where they feel uncomfortable and unsafe being wrong. And now I'm not talking about being fucking soft all the time and, oh my God, here's a participation trophy. But it's like, there's a balance we can strike between being always striving for excellence and always striving for this. And when people fail or don't do things well, giving them a learning opportunity, being constructively critical, I think it's a balance that in many areas now we've lost as a society. Now it's like, oh my God, you're excellent. You're a wonderful fucking rock star no matter what you do. And it's just not the case.
Yeah. I mean, we need motivation as individuals to actually go and do new things and make accomplishments. And actually that ties in with like the dopamine and norepinephrine system too, which is super interesting. Like there's these patterns that keep emerging across different domains of life. But with regards to sympathetic activity, I think it's super interesting to think about, you mentioned the extension pattern earlier. We didn't name it as such, but basically the pelvis dumped forward, the flat feet, the knees hyperextended, and the rib cage flared, and how that relates to being in an oversympathetic state.
So I'm glad you brought that one back up, because I just make a note to talk about binaries, right? So this is a big conversation, and definitely someone's going to watch this and go, they're going to be crossing their arms going, nope, shut up, I don't care. We could talk about the parallels and binaries and how things are related. Let's make it real simple. Compression, decompression, right? On the compression side, we have exhalation. The body compresses when you exhale, right? If anybody argues with that, go play in traffic. I don't know what to tell you. It gets smaller. We're not inflating. We're not decompressing. We're compressing as we exhale. We're pushing the air out of the ball, out of our meat balloons, okay? Decompression is going to bring us up. It's going to bring it to this extension. It's going to bring us bigger, okay? We could go way further. Compression is stance. It's weight bearing. It's accepting gravity. Decompression is overcoming gravity. It's swinging. It's exploding. It's pushing off. We could go further than that. Compression, exhalation, stance is parasympathetic. It is relaxing the nervous system. Decompression is exciting the nervous system. It's arousing us. It's using our fast twitch muscles, potentially. Great. If you can understand that conversation, you know how to do movement. And I'm not being an asshole there. I'm not being like blasé or facetious at all. If you understand that, literally, we can break everything down to you're moving towards a standing posture or accepting gravity or weight, compression, or moving away from it. That is every multi-joint movement in every sport. And all you have to do is break down the subcomponents of those two phases, identify what someone doesn't have, give them efficiency there, slowly, incrementally, then load it and whoop up. Everyone's doing great every sport. That's it. It sounds really easy when you say it like that, but that's why we do all this testing and go through things and somewhat algorithmically progress people. But when we talk about, and again, I know someone's getting pissed off about this, let's talk about, for example, why someone could be in a position of extension that's giving them sympathetic activity, because don't take my word for it. Again, first of all, go to PubMed, it's your friend. Second of all, when we have someone who's got, and this is not the only presentation, but it's the easiest one to talk about, someone who's big bilateral rib cage, neck breather, they're going to get a lot of air into the into the bottom of the lungs, rather, as opposed to the top of the lungs, specifically because the posterior mediastinum, the bit of your back that should basically puff out when you inhale, which hopefully you guys can see here. If I inhale, Yeah, that's fine. It's easy to see there. Back goes, poof, that's the posterior mediastinum. Okay. If you've got a pair of scapulae wedged in there because you've got good posture, then you're not going to be able to expand there. So it's going to push everything forward. The idea that we talk about yogis and other breath work, and they talk about breathe into your, I can't tell air where to fucking go. Air responds to physics. If it responded to me, I would fart into my hand and have it chase down people who said stupid shit to me. That's not how it works. So we can only create systems of pressure that direct air where we need it. When we're in this position, we're going to get usually a lot of belly breathing, which is not diaphragmatic breathing. That's a whole different thing we can talk about later. Or a lot of elevation. When we get that, we're going to get a higher oxygen uptake compared to carbon dioxide because we've got different alveoli concentrations, different areas of the lung. We're also going to have a cadence and volume of inhalation that's a little bit too high. So typically what we get is either clinical or subclinical, very, very often subclinical respiratory alkalosis. We'll get a little bit too much oxygen in the blood, a little bit not enough carbon dioxide. And what we're going to get with that is random fluff just came from somewhere. If anybody's looking at Weiss, was looking around. Yeah, random fluff floated in. When we have this clinical respiratory alkalosis or subclinical, we're going to get less dissociation of oxygen from hemoglobin. So you go to your doctor, and you're like, and I found this, by the way, when I was powerlifting and doing bodybuilding. I'd walk up the stairs, fit, strong, resting heart rate in the low 40s, sometimes high 30s. And I'd get to the top of the stairs in New York City after doing subway, like, trying not to show I'm out of breath. What the fuck? I'm cardiovascularly fit and strong and muscular. I don't understand why I'm out of breath. The best way to think about it is you're in Canada with American dollars. You have all this oxygen, but you can't spend it. Again, I didn't make this up. Look up the Bohr effect, BOHR. I think it's like Niels Bohr brother. Fucking bunch of overachievers, that whole family. Really are.
Literally.
But they talk about the dissociation curve. That's why you get that pulse oxygen. You got 98% oxygen.
Yep.
But you can't use it. It's floating around. And what's happening then is because you can't use it and you're exerting yourself, you try and breathe in more. And it becomes this vicious cycle. That's something similar to what we see in a panic attack. You know, someone overbreathes, and you get to the point where the pH comes to the level where they can't really dissociate much oxygen at all. What do? They breathe into a bag to recirculate carbon dioxide and lower the overall pH of the blood. And all of a sudden, they're getting better. Again, that's obviously an oversimplification, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds on the blood chemistry side of things. But that's how we can get stuck in this kind of constant threat of constant state of threat. Again, the literature also reports that we have circulating higher levels of cortisol during those sorts of events. And for a lot of people, it's a chronic event. So they get stuck in this idea of I have to breathe more because I can't breathe. So they have this low-level threat going on. So there's people walking around, and just by virtue of how they walk, move, and breathe, they're like low-level hypervigilance, PTSD type symptoms. They're ready to go fly off the handle a little bit sooner than they should. And I say this, having been one of those people, you know, I go off the handle. I'm like, that was an overreaction. I know what I'm doing, it's an overreaction, but my brain is sensing this threat. I didn't even know that. I knew something in the background. That's the whole problem with it, is the background threat. And the way, again, I like to kind of outline this to people is if I grab like a torch, start shining this torch in your eye, and you're having a great day, you'd be like, stop. What are you doing? Stop. All right, stop, cool. Now, if you just crashed your car on the way here and stepped in dog shit right before you got in the door, and then tripped and fell on your face, and I shine that torch in your eyes, you're going to lose your shit, like a shit collector with amnesia. It's going to be ridiculous. And that's what happens to a lot of people is they have these background threats, background stressors. They don't realize they're happening. That's changing their overall ability to deal with other stressors. And people are just unhappy because of it.
Yeah. And we know stress is cumulative, like all different forms of stress, whether it's from a physical injury, whether it's from a fight you had with your spouse, whether it's from
past traumas.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. These are all summative. And at some point, it's like it becomes like sort of a feed forward loop, a vicious cycle. And you have to make an intervention at some point in that, you know,
put the brakes on.
Yes. At some level, the brakes need to be put on and something needs to change. Otherwise, you're just going to be burning yourself out completely over time. As
you dive into polyvagal theory of how the nervous system works as well, by default, we're ramped up. We have to put the brakes. Like it's not like, oh, why am I not just relaxed by default? We're ramped up by default. We have to put the brakes on. That's an active thing we have to do. So it's important to understand that as well. That some people are like, well, I just do what I do, so why should I have to do that? Because you're literally, it's your foot wants to put the pedal to the metal at all times, and the nervous system goes, yeah, we don't have to do that. It's not necessary. But if you're constantly in that level of threat, first of all, you got nowhere to go when the foot actually has to go to the metal as well. Like you got a real problem then when you're under real stress. And that's super sad because life is not nice and it's not fair. And for a lot of people, and they have to deal with all these stresses when they already have these underlying stresses they can't manage. They don't have the tools to do.
Yeah.
This is why I get pissed off about this stuff, though, because people take other people's health into their hands and completely fucking disregard the responsibility that comes with it.
Absolutely. I just had like an image of zebra and lion come into my head when you're talking about like balancing being stressed versus relaxed, and like how if lions are laying down in the savannah and the zebras are just grazing nearby because they know that the laying down lions aren't dangerous. Once the lions are up and hunting, that's when the zebras turn on. Exactly. So they know when to relax, when not to relax. I think human beings, like, we have a particular problem because we're so aware of our own mortality, whereas other animals aren't. And so that does create this like kind of low level anxiety behind everybody's like greatest fears.
But it's also from both a physiological and a psychological perspective, we fucking ruined ourselves. Like, I would argue, I'm not saying we should go and do this, but I argue we probably peaked around hunter-gatherer and agriculture ruined us. And I'm not the first person to say that.
I agree. Yeah.
But when we look at, again, I'm not saying you shouldn't get educated, but the education system is like, in your most important developmental, emotionally, cognitively, and physiologically years, you're stuck sat in a seat being told to shut up.
Yeah.
That's it. Like,
it's insane.
And we expect to have fully functioning humans as adults. Like, it's mind-blowing.
It is. I mean, from what I understand, the current education model was really based off of like training factory workers. Yeah,
pretty much.
So like making automatons that just do what they're told really well and not like creating healthy sovereign humans.
Yeah.
I think it's Rockefeller.
I was going to say, I thought that was one of the
There's a whole myth of, It would be interesting to actually learn more about that, because it's just insane that we just kind of grandfathered in all of those old ways of doing things and we haven't updated it, because
we've talked about kind of the fitness industry and health industry being far behind the research.
Yeah.
The education. And I know a lot of teachers, this is not against them. They don't have the facility or the autonomy that they're allowed to actually go and use the modern, like, up-to-date kind of teaching methods.
Yeah,
which
they aren't
are
given the
proven
resources.
to be so much better.
Absolutely. Yeah, they aren't given the resources. They aren't given the liberty to kind of teach in the way that they feel is best. And
particularly in this country as well. Like, they have just don't have resources. It's unbelievable.
Actually, I think a lot of that started with like the No Child Left Behind Act and all the standardized testing, where it's like we now have to train specifically everybody in this very specific way to be able to pass these tests so that we get more funding as a school.
And then it's weird to me as well as a foreigner. Then, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to try and turn you into people by the time you get to college.
Yeah.
That's like, well, first of all, not everybody goes to college. Second of all, it's too late. Like, it's too late to talk about emotional development and rounding out your character when you're 19, 20 or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, your best years for rounding out your character are gone.
Not to mention,
I know somebody's going to watch that depressed. I can't change. You can. It's just harder. It's fine.
Sure. Yeah. Especially if it's like very novel things. And I mean, we also aren't taught any of the major life skills that you need to actually survive on your own as an adult, like how to cook, how to maybe grow your own food, how to do your bills, manage
the mitochondria
finances.
is the powerhouse of the cell, though.
Yes, it is.
Everyone knows
Never
that.
forget.
No one knows anything else about it, but everyone knows that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's just a whole tangent. But there's a question I wanted to ask you before I forget. And that is, so you see a lot of people coming in with similar patterns, and you can approach them in similar ways or different ways depending on what's going on with that person. Do you have any insights about how people get stuck into these patterns? Are there any specific, like head injuries, for example, can be one? Anything else like that?
We'll get the head injuries in a minute. That's a whole kettle of fish right there. Honestly, again, that's kind of what I was alluding to with the school thing, is that when you have someone and you basically put them in a static position, and this comes back to our very first conversation about being stuck in a posture, holding good posture. Don't tell your kids to do that. Just leave them the fuck alone.
Yeah.
You put someone in a seat for 10 years, looking straight ahead. You rob them of three-dimensional movement. That's what you do. And that in itself, that will screw most people up. Then you put them in a city. You put them in a city where they sit in a subway, they face forward. They walk between buildings that hem in their visual field. They're constantly under a barrage of noise and vibration. They don't move, they don't climb, they don't rotate, they don't walk on uneven ground. They don't have to deal with any physiological stressors unless they want to. And we talk about humans wanting to be lazy. I mean, we couldn't fuck them up more if we tried, unless you literally immobilize people. That's about, like, in the Matrix, they put them in like the tubes, or the like kind of egg sac things, the membranes. That's basically the only way we could fuck it up more, because during those developmental years, we're just not expressing any sort of movement. And not to use the old adage, but if you don't use it, you lose it. That's it. Like, we could go further than that and say, when we talk about one of the reasons we have people who are 90% people who are right-handed is in embryogenesis, you unfold from the right diaphragm first, and you kind of go that way. On top of that, the left side of the body is sensed by the right cortex of the brain. The right side of the body is sensed by the left and right cortex of the brain. That's why a right side stroke will usually cause more damage than a left side stroke, because we're still getting some feedback as well. There's more than that. We're gravitationally heavier on the right side. We have the liver over there. We have an extra lobe to the lung over there. We have higher attachments to the diaphragm, the ribs up there. Like there's a whole bunch of different reasons we're going to have that preference towards that right side. Even if you're left-handed, you have a preference towards the right side neurologically.
Mm-hmm. And so that kind of is an inherent asymmetry that's present that can become exacerbated under conditions of like immobilization.
And if we're going to try to break it down to simplicity, again, this is oversimplicity, but we're using it for the sake of discussion. The right side tends to be stuck more towards stance, left side towards swing. The right side tends to be able to get more parasympathetic, left side sympathetic, right? Now, we won't be able to do both on both. And then you get some people who are very athletic, who've been expressing strength and power and that sort of stuff, or just their environment pushes them there. They'll get stuck in swing on both sides. And we talk about, and just kind of any of the fitness people who are watching this, to kind of just do a little callback. If you're in a swing phase on both sides, or explosion phase, for example, if you're squatting with a big arch back, squatting is the kind of prototype for this. If you squat down and you want to jump off the floor with an arch back, how do you do it? Anyone watching this? With a big arch back, the way most people teach you how to squat, try then jump after that. You can't, not any way efficiently. You have to be able to compress, to bunch up, to anterior tilt the pelvis, to coil a spring, to then uncoil it and get the reward of that explosivity. And this is the problem with a lot of the fitness stuff, but it's not just the fitness stuff. It's the way we live our lives. We don't, like, I'm not saying go fucking walk barefoot up a mountain, but like if you have the opportunity, you probably do. Like, if you can't do that, okay, cool. We can do interventions of fitness and movement that are going to help you get the same effect. But yeah, if you can be outside walking up a mountain, your bare feet, and it's nice and grassy and uneven and not too rocky because you've cut your feet, if you don't have big, thick pads there, go fucking do it. Like, again, I don't like to lean too much into the ambiguity and the hippie side of things, but yeah, go fucking touch grass.
It's a good idea. Highly recommend. How do the head injuries play into this? Because I personally, I used to do horseback riding as a kid and fell off quite a few times. I never had like a diagnosed concussion or anything, but I've been working with you on some like facial asymmetries, and that's a super common thing that we can talk about as well. But what is the role of head injuries in postural imbalances? So
I deal with a lot of TBI people, traumatic brain injury people, concussions, that sort of stuff. I don't talk a lot about it on my social media because what I don't want to do is give people that nocebo.
Yeah.
So if you are watching this, if you might hear my dog snoring and snapping over here. If you are watching this, don't try and diagnose yourself with this stuff. Don't be a dumbass. Don't go, oh my God, my face is broken. I'm going to go fucking, no, just don't. Go talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. You know, people every time I talk about this, someone comes and go, I think my neck is on backwards or something absolutely ridiculous, you know? So what you'll typically see in a lot of people's, when we see a concussion, is we'll see a jaw that has moved significantly right of center line. We'll see a left eye, it's squintier and typically a bit lower. Typically. There are other ways to present that's by far the most common. The TLDR is don't get hit in the fucking head if you can avoid it. But having been through that, I had 5 TBIs and a cervical spine trauma that almost left me quadriplegic when I was 17 as well. Also don't recommend. From gymnastics, you'll see that shift. And again, I don't want to get into the mechanics of the shift because it's just going to confuse the shit out of everybody.
Yeah.
This is not coming from PRI directly. It's not coming from me. This has been noted in like osteopaths, in craniosacral therapy, in physical therapy, in Grey's Anatomy for 100 plus years. This is not, oh, we're saying this happens. This happens. There's tons of documentation. Shut up. Go read a book. Touch grass, read a book. TLDR.
We're building a list here.
Yeah, exactly. Touch grass, read a book. All right, cool. Learn to exhale. That's a pretty good actually list for everybody.
Yep.
What this does, I cannot overstate, and I know some of the clients I've worked with will watch this and they'll understand. How people react to it is very different. How I reacted to it was to become hyper vigilant, and I wouldn't say violent, but I would say I had a very, very short fuse. And it was very helpful for me as a competitive fighter because I'd be like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm always ready to go. You know that bit in the Avengers and the Hulk's like the secret is I'm always angry. Very helpful.
You probably had a facial torsion.
Oh, I did. If you've seen the Goonies,
Yes.
Sloth, like, you guys, that was essentially me. I know I showed you the picture before. My jaw was like way over here. Left eye was like squinty down here.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like I was constantly slightly surprised. What? It was the whole thing. Now, this is where it gets difficult. The treatment for this will be different for every person. I don't like doing the whole everybody's different shit.
Mm-hmm.
But it should, for me, start with non-manual work, and we should always escalate with the least invasive, least costly intervention first. And this is again where I differ from some people who talk about this stuff. They want to jump into visual and dental immediately. I'm like, when and if necessary only, and that'll be determined by testing. But before we even get to that part, what this does to your brain, to your mind, to who you are as a human is fucking horrible. And I cannot state how unhappy I was for 20 plus years, which is probably why I'm a crotchety asshole now, or that could just be cultural and familial. I'm not really entirely sure, to be honest. My little sister is definitely better adjusted than I am, but it's kind of what you'd hope for. When Ron Ruska, the director of PRI, when he made like a makeshift mouth guard to give me molar contact, to let me sense. I mean, there's that word again. Sensing is a skill. And then he had me hold my left molar to get contact there because I couldn't get them to touch, and do particular PRI drills to basically reorganize some of the cranial bones. Yes, skull bones move. If you don't believe it, go read a book. Always have to put that in there because someone always comes in the comments, skull bones don't move. I'm like, oh. Again, if you have access to the
maybe
internet,
your dense skull.
You have access to the internet, but you don't know how to use it. So that's read book, learn how to exhale, touch grass, learn how to use internet. I know I can't turn off the troll. Yeah, when Ron put that thing into my mouth, he had me doing these exercises. I was like, all right, cool, let's see how this goes. And he had me walk up and down the room after doing that. There's like 70 people in the room. And all of a sudden, it's going to sound like I'm over-exaggerating it or whatever else. I didn't really think it was going to make much difference. I was like, oh, maybe someone moving would be better. Maybe it'll stick better. Yeah. Definitely. I had a healthy skeptical attitude. Fuck. All of a sudden, I remember my visual field changed. All of a sudden, like I felt my peripheries come back.
Wow.
And I was walking in the room and I was doing my best. I got the biggest rush of emotion I've ever had in my life.
Wow.
The only thing comparative to that, I'm sure I'm going to alienate somebody saying this. If you've ever taken a lot of mushrooms and you had that, oh shit, I'm connected to the universe moment, that's sort of what it felt like, but like more intense and shorter. And it was like I got teleported back to my own body. I could sense things again. I was inhabiting my own body. Prior to that, it felt like I was kind of like not an observer, but like I was somehow not in charge of what happened. Probably my sympathetic nervous system was rerunning the show. My amygdala more than anything else, I'd imagine, because everything was sense of threat. And I just wanted to cry. I just wanted to cry so fucking hard. I wanted to cry more then than we did when most of my people in my family died. It's like, shit. I feel like the biggest exhale, the biggest weight off my shoulders ever happened. Wow. And I had understood before that I was emotionally dysregulated. I'd tried acting classes and done a lot of that sort of stuff, and every self-help book you can think, a little bit of therapy. And those things definitely helped. They definitely helped. And I've seen people prescribe those when they have TBIs. They just get over it. But we can't underestimate the physiological contribution to emotional cognitive disturbance. My ability to process information came back so much faster. My ability to motor learn came back immediately. Again, not the same level it was before, I will say, but like still very, very high. Changed my entire life overnight. I became a person who could just relax again, who was just happy. I hadn't been content or really happy for more than a couple of seconds in 20 years. Wow. I would me and the martial arts team went to the World Martial Arts Championships for breaking. I think third and fourth in under 200 pounds. I think I was like 150 at the time. I was like, got my first degree black belt in Michoacán Kung Fu, the youngest black belt in the world. I was like, You think you end up chasing something that makes you feel something. You just don't feel anything. In relationships, it's like, guess it just doesn't get better than this. Like everything just fucking sucks. Not to be too fucking morbid and morose and depressing, but if you're in that TBI cycle, that can be your life. I've got a couple of clients that the same. Now, other people don't go that way. They go withdrawing. They're deer in the headlights. Everything frightens them. Say them act like they go flight, full flight. And I've had a couple people like that as well. But please, for the love of God, if you work with people with brain injury, stop telling them to just get over it. Stop telling them it's all in their head, literally. Because there are physiological contributors to this stuff that really will change things if done well. For some people, most people I've worked with, if not everyone, has needed some sort of dental work. They've needed some sort of device to help them feel and sense appropriate occlusal contact, teeth contact. And that's just not teeth are not magic. What's happening there is they're now able to inhibit and turn on other musculature in their face to allow temporal bones to move, to allow pumping, which brings us full circle. We have to be able to alternate and inhabit different things. When the paranasal sinuses change over dominance, everyone knows what circadian rhythm is, your 24-hour cycle. Underlying that, you have ultradian rhythm, and almost nobody knows that exists. Your ultradian rhythm is basically the cyclical dominance of sympathetics and parasympathetics that corresponds to paranasal sinus dominance that cycles every 90 minutes to 4 hours, depending on the person. If that doesn't happen, if you're not cycling between those two, cool, you're fucking stuck. And you're almost always stuck in that sympathetic dominance, which is stress. If you're a highly stressed human being, yeah, sympathetic dominance is not a fun time. When I do some of the basic breathing work, even people without TBIs, I probably assessed 300 or 400 people in the last 7 or 8 years. I've had at least 30 of them say, oh my God, I feel high. Just from breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And that level of feeling high, I'm not talking about being baked and being cognitively useless, but that level of that's how you should be feeling all the time. My now wife and I, we were in Spain a couple of years ago. And I'm not going to get into blame here. She's going to kill me for saying this. But the car happened to get scratched. I won't get into the why. It wasn't really her fault. I wasn't driving, but the car happened to get scratched. I think they charged my credit card like $3,000 or $4,000. And she was distraught. She goes, oh my God. So I'm like, I don't fucking care. I was like, I have insurance. It's going to cover it. We're going to get the money back. It's a temporary thing. It's not a big deal. She was distraught. Prior to my TBI, symptom resolution, I would have flipped oh my fucking God. I would have yelled at the dude at the car place. I may have yelled generally, not at her, because I never directed it at people really. I would have directed a lot of it inwardly for sure. But yeah, I was like, okay, it's going to be fine. And so to this day, when anything big happens, she's always somewhat phased and surprised by shit will hit the fan. And I'll be like, I can elevate, escalate, and get up there if I want.
Choice.
But yeah, now I'm like, okay, I can meet that challenge if I want to. And actually, complete side note to that, talking about perception and sense and everything else. Someone else has done a TED Talk on this, and I'm doing her a disservice by not remembering her name. But your perception of a stressor changes your physiological response to that stressor. It changes whether or not you get blood vessel dilation or constriction. It changes your blood pressure response. So even if you can't and don't have access to someone to help you manage the physiological problems that put you in that hypersensitive state, your perception, which you can stop and reframe, will change your physiological response to the stressor. Now, if someone punches you in the face, probably don't sit there and be like, that's a challenge. The challenge is smack them back or get to safety, whichever way you're going. But in non-real threatening response times, me have an argument as friends and you say some shit that pisses me off. I don't go, I'm going to clobber you with a giant mic. I let me just take myself out of this moment and see, am I being unreasonable? Anybody who's in a relationship, that's a very good skill to have, especially when both of you have it. Yeah, I'm very lucky. My wife does have that skill where, if one of us is being a little bit too much, we both go, hold on a second. And we go, we're being silly. It's refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
It's very refreshing. And I'm glad that I can hold up my part of that bargain too, because I've told her this. If she had met me 2 years earlier, I wouldn't have been able to. And there's no way a relationship would have worked because I would have fucked it up entirely. It wouldn't have been on her.
Totally. I mean, having the ability to pause in any sort of situation and really respond instead of react is so crucial. And it directly relates to your ability to, get out of sympathetic or between the two poles of the nervous system instead of just being stuck.
I know we've gone a long tangent here talking about emotional cognitive abilities and stuff, but it's all linked.
Yeah.
You can't divorce one from the other. And this is why when I see people in these big extended positions all the time, I feel sorry for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not me being an asshole. I feel sorry for them because I've been them. I've been that person now. I was a more complicated, more screwed up version than that. But I know how good you can feel. And if you've never felt athletic, and I know a lot of people have never felt athletic, it's fucking cool. It's like having a secret superpower. And I sound silly to everybody, but I've competed in 5-6 sports internationally. I picked up jiu-jitsu this year and you've seen me fight. I just win almost everything. And I had a client this week who's on my online program. He just took up, actually the jiu-jitsu class this week as well, but he took up something, he started doing cycling. And he's doing something gardening. He said, it's kind of weird. I'm going to mess it up. I would quote him verbatim, but I don't remember exactly what he said. But he said something along the lines of, I was just intrinsically able to kind of figure out the best way to do it, and it felt good. He's like, I've never been able to do that before. I'm like, cool, the program worked. That's That's what you want. When you have all the abilities, the brain will self-select the best one. And there's this idea in some realms of the fitness industry, the brain just self-organizes. That's correct, but they're missing a crucial fucking huge pillar of that idea. The brain self-organizes based on a currently available strategies. You can't, it's like saying, okay, I'm going to self-organize, I'm going to move to France, I'm going to just automatically speak fucking French. No, I got to learn French first. I have to learn very simple French first, and then conversational French, then I'll hopefully eventually be fluent. This idea that the brain will just self-organize is fucking stupid. Otherwise, why do we have singing coaches? Why do we have sports coaches? Why do we have dance coaches? Why do we have coaches at all? The brain just self-organizes into things. Once you show it to me once, I should be able to do it. That is such a fallacious misstep that has been popularized recently. Thankfully, it didn't. It's kind of like a flash in the pan, or at the very least, well, I've blocked a lot of people involved in talking that shit because I just couldn't deal with the constant arguing with no actual merit or mechanistic explanation or research. It would just always devolve to ad hominem. So if the brain would self-organize things, then we would have no postural issues. We would have no chronic use injuries. We would have no, I mean, just very simply fallacious on the face of things. It doesn't self-select. It self-selects based on available current strategies. If you want to do something fucking different, we got to teach you something different. It reminds me when I was training my dog. You met Bowser. Bowser he's great, right? If you give him a stimulus, he'll pick it up pretty quickly and learn how to react to it based on what happens after that stimulus. I have helped so many people train their dogs because just the basic understanding of simple stimulus and response goes so far. Most people don't even understand it themselves. If you want a given response, there has to be a particular given stimulus. There could be a broad variety of stimulus that work, but the more specific the response you want, the more specific and pedantic the stimulus will have to be as well. Sometimes when teach people in your exercise, like, why are there so many details to this one? It's like very simply, so you don't fuck it up. That's it. The more I constrain this exercise with, you have to sense this, feel this, do this, the more I know you're doing it right. That's simple. But initially you're thinking about 12 things. Then what we do is we move away from muscular sense. And again, this is where people in the PRI side of things, they fall off this. They don't go the whole way to the end. They do the primary PRI courses, and the primary courses are phenomenal. They're very orthopedic minded, very muscles and bones minded. After that, they talk much more about neurological integration and sense and that sort of stuff. You go as far as the tertiary stuff, it's mind-blowing. But again, don't quote PRI in this. This is my interpretation of what they say. But if you go from the primary through to the tertiaries, you'll see that primary, orthopedic, bones, muscles, do you feel cool? Secondaries, I'm asking you, hey, we're going to put this pisiform or the outside of a heel on the floor. You sense the weight on that while keeping these other things. Cool. Now I know you have the muscles involved because we've created like a macro for it. There are further macros beyond that, which, like when we talk about internal pressure sense. So for example, a level 1, and don't try and use this if you don't understand it. I'm just trying to give a broad understanding of this. A level 1, having someone in a position that should be feeling a hamstring. Do you feel a hamstring? Yes. Fantastic. I know you can find a hamstring there. We can develop muscular strength with that hamstring there, or some level of competency and sensation. Cool. Level 2, we'll put them in a different position. And I'll go, okay, do you have this and this? It might be a hamstring and internal oblique on that side. Cool. If you can feel the outside of a heel and internal oblique, I know based on the position that you have to be in, that your hamstring has to be short, whether or not you sense it. And that's how you move from consciously managing. If you break it down to the 4 grid, unconscious incompetence. Yes. I'm fucking it up and I don't even know I'm fucking it up, which is most people when it comes to movement. Conscious incompetence. I know I shouldn't do it like this, but this is how I'm doing it. Conscious competence. If I concentrate, I can do it. Unconscious competence and mastery. That's how we kind of bridge that gap of this crazy detail-heavy, pedantic things to making someone an athlete. Is you give it to them in stages. Level 1, do you feel a hamstring? Cool. Level 2, do you feel that lateral heel? Level 3, do you feel the compression from an acetabulum on a femur providing ground reaction force and gravity? Cool. If you feel that, I know you have everything else. I want to have a competent stance in that. Now, that's not a one-day progression or discussion, but that's how I turn someone who's kind of stiff and not naturally athletic into someone who's very athletic. Again, their ceiling may be lower than someone who's that natural athlete, but I can turn anyone into someone who's athletic, anyone, if they shut the fuck up and do what they're told, and then communicate back and forward as well.
Yeah, that's super encouraging. And I think athleticism is something that everybody should strive for at some level, because it just makes you able to navigate the world more efficiently. And
you have more options. You can play.
Yeah, you can play exactly, which is so missing from culture today in general, like at all levels, psychologically and physically.
Yep. There's a great anecdote, which I love. I'm going to change the name because I'm going to insult someone otherwise. We'll call her Sarah. That's not her name. But when I was maybe like 18, 19, I think, I was working my first gym job. So I'm doing this like 20 years now. I'm old. And I remember all my friends knew how to drive. I'd never learned how to drive yet. And I remember this girl. Yeah.
Yes.
Edit that out. You have to edit that out, right?
Okay.
This girl, Sarah.
I'll put a bleep in.
Yep. Thank you. This girl, Sarah, not her name. Can't believe that. So she went and passed the driving test first time. And she was such a nice girl, so lovely, dumb as a rock. I remember thinking, holy shit. Didn't even occur to her that she was going to fail. Like, so many people have such self-limiting beliefs based on what other people have showed them, told them, or something that they have told themselves. We have these narratives, and when it comes to athleticism, to fitness, I can't do it. I can't be that. I could never. It's insane. Yeah. Insane. And again, I look at my lovely wife. When I was starting, obviously I have martial arts experience. I've done a lot. And I said, hey, I'm starting jiu-jitsu soon. Do you want to come with me? And she's watching, she's going to yell at me again. As a perfunctory thing, I kind of asked her, hey, do you want to join with me? Assuming she's like, no. And she started with me, and she was going very religiously for twice a week. And she's getting really good. She actually even managed to choke me out one day.
Wow.
That was the highlight of her month. And I got her back. But yeah, no, she's getting really, really good. And because she didn't give herself a narrative of I can't.
Yeah.
And so many people, I can't, it doesn't matter what it is. I can't learn that. I can't do that. I could never. To quote Lao Tzu, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And time passes whether or not you try to do the fucking thing you want to do. So just go do it. Go try whatever. Learn anything. Coming back to that, everybody's body's different, but we're not really. Humans aren't that different. Anything a human being has, anything 99% of people have capability to do, you have capability to do. Whether it's cognitive, emotional, intellectual, or physical. Now, it may take time. It may take a lot of work. Your ceiling may be lower than some people's. Your ceiling may be higher than others. But anything that you really, really, really want to do, if you fucking commit to doing it, it can be done. And that was my realization of I'm not going to say a real name this time, of what I call the Sarah principle. Don't give yourself a fucking self-limiting narrative. Just don't do it. Because if I had done that, I'd still be emotionally just messed up. I'd still be in pain from my joints that didn't work because my neck didn't work. Like, just don't do it. Simple.
Yeah, and I feel like that whole mindset is reinforced by, again, our education system where it teaches you if you fail, like you're bad, like this is unacceptable versus like this is a learning experience you're using to be better in the future.
In business, you fail fast and often so that you find success. In sports, you fail fast and often. In education, it's not the case.
Yeah,
like it's so discouraged. Fail hard, fail often, fail fast. And from each failure, try to learn something. And then you won't keep failing. It doesn't matter what it is. I can't tell you how many fucking people I've had for weight loss, for example, and they fail and they fail and they fail and they fail. And finally something clicks and they go, shit, I've started to apply some of the things and, it's actually kind of getting easy. Should it be this easy? It's like, yeah, everything should be easy. I mean, your training program should be relative. I don't say it should be like an absolute cakewalk, but you should be leaving forward. She who must not be named decided we have some sort of announcement. Damn you.
This is an advertisement now.
We put these kind of limitations on ourselves, and human beings are predictive in nature. Everything we do, we talk about the microphone. Okay, I predict all the different things I might do to then self-select the best one. When you give yourself a narrative outcome before you've tried something, that predictive nature kicks in, and we will fail. Like, I don't know anybody who's been, like, I'm sure someone find a great obscure example, but that might be the exception, not the rule. When we predict we're going to fail at something, we usually succeed in that prediction, which is failure. Now, that's not saying if you always go, okay, I'm going to succeed. You're not always going to succeed. But you're going to give yourself the chance to succeed. Like, it drives me fucking wild when people identify, or clinicians identify people as their injury. Oh, I'm a TBI guy. Ugh. No, you're a guy who had a TBI.
Correct.
You're not your fucking injury. You're not the sum of that. Like, and that's very, very dangerous and can cause like a lot of nocivic actions. It can cause people to like really just live in that position and never try and get out of it.
Yeah.
Use it as a roadblock.
Yeah, the language is super important. Actually, we had a family friend who passed recently that had MS, but she always referred to it as my MS and not like the MS or
the
something.
MS I suffer from.
Right. Like she identified with it so closely. And I think that's partly because like she got a lot of attention and care from other people because of her illness, and like not having that identity would have been scary for her.
Also, life's not fucking fair.
Yeah.
In the ideal world, we'd all be getting that care and that love and that affection that humans crave and need, regardless of whether or not we have any issues. But it is genuinely scary for a lot of people thinking, what if I don't have the issue? And I've had some people like this before who I've had to send them to consult with one of the psychologists that I work with. I'm like, hey, you're sabotaging yourself. It's a very delicate conversation, obviously. And if you're watching this and feeling attacked, this is not directed at you. But if you are feeling attacked, is there a reason for that? There might be, might not be. I'm not making judgments here. We can't say I'm not an obese person. I'm a person who needs to lose weight. I'm a person who has weight to lose. That's it. You're not an obese person. That's not who you fucking are.
Right.
It's a condition you currently have, which you don't always have to have. It's not saying it's simple or it's easy. It depends on the issues. I'm not a person with, I have a bad back. No, you don't. You have a fucking back. You have a back you don't know how to use typically, if we're accepting crazy structural deformities. Like I've had clients with 8 disc fusions in their spine go to no pain and performance again. Like if you have a bad back, what the fuck are you doing to make it better? Like don't accept that limitation. And that's not saying go crazy and do stupid shit. It's find a qualified professional to help you with that, to appropriately assess and then systematically and incrementally progress. That's key here. The 2 words rather that I say to my clients all the time: if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, the only 2 things I ever want you to remember: graded exposure. Any new stimulus, build it up and build up your competency slowly. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. That's when people stop themselves getting hurt. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You can do the dumbest shit in the world, even, for example. The dumbest shit. There has no mechanical sense to do it. I'm probably mostly okay, at least acutely, if you use graded exposure. You might have caused some long-term issues. You might eventually get injured. But yeah, you'll really extend how far you can do that dumb shit for.
Yeah, it's so true. The mindset piece is so key. And there was something I was going to ask you, but hopefully it will come back to me because it kind of escaped my mind. But there's a lot of things I still want to talk about, and we also kind of mentioned them briefly, but the whole dental and vision piece I think is super interesting and not discussed very much with regards to like, so for example, you don't go to see a psychiatrist and they don't assess your dental and vision. Like if you have anxiety problems, they don't check and see, oh, your glasses are overprescribed. You
know what's funny is actually I was working with a psychiatrist in the city for a while, lovely guy. And I talked to him about this stuff, and he actually started referring his anxiety patients to me for respiratory work.
Amazing.
It was beautiful.
Yes.
All of a sudden, they had to use a lot less meds. They felt a lot better. They moved a lot better, and he was getting better therapeutic outcomes. Like really good work in fitness, in health, in anything wellness oriented has to be interdisciplinary. I would love to sit here and say that I have the answers to everything. That's just not the fucking case. And anybody who has the brass balls to sit here and say they have the answer to everything is a fucking liar. Yeah. They're either a liar or they're an idiot. And there's no exception to that rule. Nobody has the answers to everything. There's not a single profession that can take care of every condition. I work with some of the people at SUNY on optometry. I work with some of the guys that are at the top of the AAPMD on dentistry. Obviously, I work with the PRI folks on the physical therapy aspect. Work with some phenomenal manual therapists. Again, we talked about manual therapy earlier being a good adjunct. It's not necessarily always a good solo treatment. A lot of these things have to happen in concert with motor learning. If I give someone, for example, if I get them the exact mouth guard they need from, I work with the guys up at the Hinden Center in Suffern, New York. They're fantastic, Howie and Jeff. And if I give someone the mouthpiece they need to resolve a lot of their orofacial symptoms and their neck symptoms and stuff, but I don't give them any motor learning tasks to do with that, it's not going to fucking work. And it may actually make them worse. Same thing for the visual stuff. And we talked about kind of fractals earlier. So we could talk about, I don't want to get too much into it because again, people will mess this up and misquote it. But we can imagine the molars or those lateral heels to let us know we're in stance, that it's okay to compress. If I want to get really juicy with it, we could talk about globes, right? We could talk about circular objects. Your globe here, right? It's like the head of a femur in a socket.
He's pointing to his eyeball.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
Just in case the people aren't watching.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
So my globe is my eyeball, which is analogous to a large extent to the head of a femur in an acetabulum, a socket, in a shoulder socket with a glenum and a humerus. Same thing. It affects how we move. Your visual perception, here's a fun one for everybody. Your perception of your visual periphery will precede abdominal contraction in stance. I'm not saying that. That's clinical work saying that. Clinical paper saying that. Your visual system hits your brain. We could just make the argument that the eye is part of the brain. The eyes are the limbs of the brain, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That way, it will precede pretty much everything else and be weighed differently versus everything else. So visual prescriptions can be a real problem if someone has the wrong prescription. If you're watching this or listening to this and you wear varifocals or bifocals, fucking get rid of them. Get rid of them. You're giving conflicting information to your brain. Yeah, maybe handier to not have to change your glass between two things, but it's really going to mess up your system for most people. That's if you're an optometrist watching this. Also, I encourage you to work with a manual therapist or someone who knows how to do testing and test someone who wears varifocals versus when they wear just regular glasses. Yeah, just get 2 sets of glasses. It's okay.
It's not that big of a deal, and
it really isn't.
It's going to be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
You've talked about this before, and actually we've experienced this as well. My partner had an overprescription, and it really was making him overactivated.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe like the mechanism behind that, how that can happen, like how it can make you more sympathetic by having an overprescription and for like nearsightedness?
Before I even say that, there's one thing I would like to say, which is going to definitely upset some optometrists. I prefer a stand-up optometric test, a stand-up refraction, which a lot of optometrists don't really do, versus a sit-down one, because sit-down one puts us in a position where we're locking on SCMs and upper traps and some of the neck musculature, which already can mess up our prescription a little bit.
Totally.
If you're an optometrist or someone who's in the visual field and you don't think that there's any difference in a stand-up optometric test and a sit-down one, go to PubMed, because there is documented differences. I'm not saying it, I'm not making it up. The research is there. Go have hurt feelings somewhere else. That's fine. Cry quietly in the corner. It's all right. Or learn, get better like the rest of us want to do. And because I'm not trying to shit on optometry, because I've worked with some phenomenal people there. But on almost every profession, there's people who just don't want to move forward.
Yep.
They want to do what's always been done.
Yep.
The best way, I'm just going to use an analogy for this as well, because it gets complicated with the eyes, especially. The best way is, imagine making a set of orthotics for your feet, because a set of glasses or a set of contacts, they're orthosis for an eye.
Okay.
In the same way, a mouth guard is an orthosis for teeth. In the same way, a set of arches or inserts are put into your shoes, they're orthosis for feet. All these things are doing is giving us a change in sensory perception. That's it. Now, the eyes happen to be very heavily weighted. Imagine I've got someone with low back pain, they've got a constantly arched back, and I put them in a set of high heels. That's what giving someone the wrong set of glasses is going to do. It's going to tighten the capillus muscles in the eyes. It's going to immobilize the sphenoid. The temporal bones won't be able to rotate. Muscles will be locked into place and unable to have that variability, that oscillatory capacity, the ability to vibrate and just move. And they'll lock them again neurologically, physiologically, emotional cognitively. The emotional cognitive side of things, by the way, some people are a little more resilient on that side than others. Some people won't feel a massive effect. But if you're really locked up, everyone will feel an effect. Everyone.
Mm-hmm.
If you're listening to this and you're like, I feel fantastic, I'm happy for you. Great. Not everybody wins the lottery. Some people do. Some people can do fucking everything wrong, and still succeed. We see that in every walk of life. There's some musicians who just fucking suck, make millions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Some actors who, I'm not going to mention anybody in particular, but I've got one who I just love to, and who's just trash.
Yeah.
But it's millions of dollars. Same thing. We shouldn't judge things on survivorship bias. We should judge things on, if I can take the person who's worst at this and get them to a high level. That's the template we should be using. When it comes to the fitness realm, you'd see that with like the old Eastern European weightlifting blocks and the Chinese type of training, where they take thousands of athletes, and how they identify the natural athletes is they not literally beat them, but they throw a training load at them so hard that someone survives. And then people go, well, they train like this, so it must be the best way to train. I'm like, no. They took the people who were just mutants, who would train and survive that block that was designed to break people. And they identified their elite level athletes who were born that way and maximized their potential. Everybody else fell apart. They were broken, they were injured, they were ill. Let's not base everything on what we can do with our best people.
Mm-hmm.
You can take an athlete like LeBron James and you can do the dumb, I picked him for a reason, because a lot of training that I see from him from his I haven't seen anything for a while, but it's a very questionable technique, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter. LeBron James is going to be LeBron James no matter what you did. That was sealed in high school.
Yep.
Like, unless he had a freak accident, he was always going to be a phenomenal professional basketball player because he was born to be an athlete. There are people like this. We should not use what they do to dictate what people who are not born that way do. And it's fucking stupid on the face of it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that also plays into just like aesthetics in general. Like, you know, like you mentioned earlier, I want to look like this person, so I'm going to do what they do. And it's like that, there's no way that's guaranteeing you to get those results.
It's also completely fallacious on the face of it.
Yes.
Right? We talked about kind of yoga, long and lean. It's like I'm saying, I want to be good at basketball, so if I play basketball, it's going to be tall and black.
Right.
No, like, I'm going to be in the NBA if that happens. It's just not going to, it's just fucking silly.
Self-selection.
Yeah. And I purposely, exactly that.
Yeah.
I purposely use that example because it's fucking ridiculous on the face of it.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not going to change my race. I'm not going to get taller, unfortunately. It's not fair. But no, yeah, people self-selecting the things they're going to be great at. And then they succeed there. Everyone's like, oh my God, you succeeded because you did this.
Right.
They were going to do that from fucking day one. It's like someone who got Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or ligamentous laxity. Everyone's like, they're so flexible because of the yoga. No, they got good at yoga because they have ligamentous laxity genetically.
Yes.
Like, I've trained clients who are contortionists. And again, I'm not calling them out. But what they do to be successful will not work for me. They will not work for that powerlifter with the extra facets in the joints, who no matter what he does, will never be a bendy person. That's okay. He's a rhinoceros, that's a giraffe, or some other such fucking comparison.
Right. I want to talk about flexibility because I think it's super important and there's lots of misconceptions there, but just briefly about vision, can you also have somebody that gets locked up if they're underprescribed or not wearing a prescription, or does it only, okay.
Oh yeah. Okay. It's, you can have any which way. I typically would prefer someone usually who's underprescribed rather than overprescribed. There's also a problem whereby what your eyes like and what you like versus what your nervous system likes are different things. So this is where having someone who knows manual testing, if you have a complex visual case, the ideal acuity, the clearest picture that you see may not result in the best testing. And that's a big disconnect. We always typically, and I don't want to speak for the entire profession I'm not a part of, but what I typically see is people are adjusted for acuity because there's
driving liability probably.
Exactly. And the best optometrists in the world, they know, I've talked to some of them, they know that the eyes affect the rest of the system. Yeah. But that hasn't filtered down to the profession as a whole just yet. And I've been so just genuinely lucky and grateful that I've managed to work with some people, just in random optometrists who understand that. But still, a lot of people don't. And same with some physical therapists and podiatrists understand, okay, this insert will affect the rest of the body. Some of them don't. I've seen so many podiatric inserts which have made people worse. I would say a solid 95% of them have had negative effects up chain. Wow. 5%, I'm like, oh my God, marry this person, find this guy, give him like a MacArthur grant and a hug and a high five from me. Yeah, cool, great. Amazing. Yeah, we need more of those, like, we just need more standout. We need more objective testing of any chain or of anything. I mean, we need more, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, we need more accountability and we need more patient advocacy so that I can go and see someone after getting this like foot insert, this orthotic, and they go, okay, well, we have objective testing measurements here and the worst from this insert. Acutely, I take it out, they go away, put it back in, they go, okay, we can make sure it's this, right? We can test and make sure it's that. Cool. Go back to that person and let's work as a team to get this working for you. That's what we need. We need interdisciplinary integration. We need professions that are so not afraid of interacting with one another. They're not afraid someone's going to steal and, take this client, because we need all of them. There are enough hurt people, sick people, unhappy people, people who are just not moving well and feeling well. We can all fucking work together. It's not that complicated. Yeah. Well, it is complicated, but it's not that hard to not be an asshole. Right. And I think the goal ultimately for any healthcare or adjacent provider should be to like put themselves out of business, knowing that they never actually will, but there's an endless amount of people that need help. But something interesting that I thought of when you were talking about good therapy and good sex, the end goal is discharge. Yes, there you go. If that's not a soundbite, I don't know what it is. Be here all night. There you go. We'll clip that one for sure. I was just thinking, so when you were saying about like doing objective testing and as a way to track progress, I was thinking of this teacher that I've been following a lot lately, Dr. Jack Cruz. He's a neurosurgeon rather, and big into like circadian health, but he talks about how in medicine and in all systems, like proof of work should be the gold standard. Like if something works, then you keep it. If it doesn't work, you get rid of it. There's no like
I mean, I think this is also where like the insurance model comes in, where it's like all this
that's
liability.
a whole long discussion on its own. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like the money aspects of it become more important than the actual proof of work.
Yep. And I will say there are people who are like, they hang their hat on being evidence-based, right? And yeah, you get the eye roll.
Yeah.
The problem with those people, in my experience, and I'm not trying them all at the same brush, but most of them that I've outlined with who specifically outline themselves as being an evidence-based person won't read new evidence.
Sure.
Or they won't read things that conflict with theirs. They want a custom-made study to say exactly what, they want like a level of specificity which is just impractical and illogical and just fallacious on the face of things.
Right.
Instead of being like, okay, here is a study proving this mechanistic connection. Here's a study proving the outcomes based on this intervention. Like, well, it doesn't say exactly this. I'm like, well, you're being a fucking dickhead now.
Totally.
So don't be a dickhead. If the person is getting better outcomes than you, the only question you should have is why. The first one is why. Second one is how. That's it. It shouldn't be, well, I disagree with your methods. Fuck your methods. If they're getting better outcomes consistently than you, why and how?
Yep.
That's it. You can put your ego away somewhere else, because when you're dealing with anybody else's health or wellness, it's not about you, it's about them.
Totally. And I mean, the whole evidence-based label is also like completely negating certain types of evidence. So like there's more evidence than randomized controlled trials about very specific questions.
Yes.
Like your clinical experience is a form of evidence as well.
I will note the vast majority of people who I've met and interacted with who are evidence-based have almost no experience.
Yep.
They've been doing it for 2 years.
Exactly.
Like, let me tell you about my experience.
It's very cerebral.
Yeah, and I'm like, cool. Without being a dick, how many people have you seen with this condition? Well, none. Then shut the fuck up. You don't have experience. You have an opinion. Exactly. That's okay. You can have an opinion, but you can't say in my experience, you have literally zero experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
Again, to kind of play devil's advocate, on the other end, we have people who just make this batshit connections and like have no mechanistic explanation or no, seemingly to me at least, no logical connection for what they're doing. Who like, look, I flicked your kneecap and now you're better. Like, I think we could probably meet somewhere in the middle of like, again, accepting a mechanistic explanation as opposed to a double-blind RCT.
Yep.
You know?
Totally. And I mean, we can also use empirical research and empirical evidence to inform hypothesis generation to do the RCTs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I feel like that's not very often engaged because there's certain levels of evidence that science kind of looks down on for one reason or another.
Anecdotal evidence is seen as like an absolute joke. And it's like, but when you look at outcomes over like if you have, for example, any procedure that's not working, and let's talk about, I don't want to get it wrong. I think it was ACL tears. Like one grade of ACL tears. And they found that they've been doing this obviously for a long time. They found that doing a sham surgery had the same outcomes as the actual surgery.
Yeah, I remember.
So what fucking point do we say, why are we doing the surgery?
Right.
Or can we at least narrow the criteria, maybe to a higher grade of tear that we would do the surgery? Maybe it's only a complete tear, a grade 3 tear, where we do that surgery. But why are we doing a fucking surgery when we literally have a significant amount of data? And obviously I would like to see the data replicated, but saying that a sham surgery is as effective, but we're still charging people $50,000 for the surgery and doing it.
That's probably why they're doing it.
Trauma. But this is what I'm saying. Like, we need to look, people say they're evidence-based and they'll talk about this. I'm like, well, the evidence is fucking right there. Don't do it.
Exactly.
If you're evidence-based and you're afraid to read new research, you're not evidence-based. You're a coward.
I think there's some quote about like if a man's opinion conflicts with his, or like requires him to get his paycheck or whatever, relies on his opinion, then it's like he's going to always see the certain outcome. And that's a big problem in healthcare space.
I remember talking about this in the fitness realm, and I was saying the barbell back squat is probably the most overprescribed exercise that there is. And of course, people came at me or whatever, and almost all of them were like, well, we just use barbells in our gym. I'm like, well, do you think you have a vested interest perhaps in the barbell? Also, they all also avoided every single technical question I asked them about the mechanics of the squat. So that's an aside. But I wasn't even saying squatting was bad. I was saying that specific implement, most people don't have the ability to do it in a good way. And of course, we go to ad hominems because people are like, well, people have been doing it forever. I'm like, yeah. I'm asking any commercial gym, asking people who have been doing an exercise forever, how many of them got hurt? The numbers will surprise you. Benching, most people who bench a respectable amount relative to their body weight and have been doing so for more than 5 to 10 years have an injured shoulder. Usually right. We're not getting to the why of that, but if we don't look at these patterns again, and that's all anecdotal evidence. Sure, of course, we could describe and conduct a research study for that, but that's valuable anecdotal evidence. Everyone who bench presses a certain way is starting to get shoulder injuries.
Yep.
At what point do we reevaluate? Maybe, not that we necessarily need to get rid of a bench press, maybe a technique shouldn't be old school powerlifting technique for someone who's not an old school powerlifter.
Yeah, I think exercise selection is super important depending on somebody's goals. Like,
Yeah.
there's certain exercises going to be more appropriate. And actually, we can get into that in a little bit. Maybe I want to talk about like unilateral versus bilateral lifts and what the benefits of doing some unilateral work could be. But first, I'd really like to talk about flexibility and why it's not like optimal to be the most flexible you can possibly be.
Okay, I'm going to start that off by actually telling another anecdote, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I think you might have heard this one before. So I was in a room a little bit pre-COVID. I used to run the training department for a big chain of gyms. We had like 23, 24 gyms. I had like a couple hundred staff. I had like 50 or 60 people in the room, each of whom had a minimum experience of 5 years to be hired. So minimum 320 years experience in the room, probably significantly more than that, probably closer to 400 or 500 years of experience. And I started off by saying, hey, we're not really going to spend much time on stretching and flexibility because that's a giant fucking waste of time. And I could see people huffing and puffing, throughout the room, like only a handful of them to be fair. And a couple of people being like narrowed eyes and like, where's he going with this? But most of them know me well enough to go, okay, if I said it, there's a reason for it. But then I realized I probably should spend a bit more time because not everyone had been to the previous lectures in the series. And I said, okay, let's just address that one head on. Hands up here who stretches their clients. And almost all the hands went up. I'm like, great. Hands up here who's ever seen someone get significantly more flexible after puberty from stretching. 0 hands. I'm like, great. Questions. I can see a lot of people go, oh, I've been wasting everybody's time. Like, yeah, you have. That's okay. Recognize it, move on. That's not saying stretching cannot accomplish flexibility changes, but it's saying, like, if you go into really, really long extreme stretching, that's a whole different thing. When we talk about 30, 40, 50-minute held stretches, where we're going to get sarcomere stacking and developing, that's a whole different thing, right? Still not optimal for most people. If you're someone who needs supra-physiological flexibility and you're post-puberty, you might have to go that very painful route, but you're going to eventually give yourself ligamentous laxity. And that's the real problem. That's where we get the issue. More flexibility is not better. I say this as someone who has ligamentous laxity in a number of areas from years of gymnastics and breakdancing and fighting and stuff. It just causes instability. Ligament's job is to check unnecessary or unsafe movement. That's it. So if you want to just embrace unsafe and unnecessary movement, I mean that from a force, it goes back to being athletic, a force generation, preservation, and transfer standpoint. It's not that it's necessarily, unsafe to have a joint in a particular position, but if there's force and load involved, it may be unsafe to be there.
Right.
That's all. So yeah, more flexibility is not always better. And also how people go about flexibility is often ass backwards. I use ass there for a reason. I had a pair of clients here a couple of weeks ago. Lovely pair. It's mother and daughter. And the daughter actually does jiu-jitsu. Super nice. Mother's a sweetheart. And I was telling them we're not going to do any stretches, it's a giant waste of time. And of course, I see their faces crunch up like, this guy's an idiot. Well, I may be an idiot. It's not because of this. So I said, okay, cool. I'm just going to show you real quick. I was like, can you touch your toes? And I was like, no, I'm not even close. I'm like, great. So I took her pelvis, exhale, and learned how to move the pelvis backwards. She took your toes in 20 seconds. And she's like, I've been stretching for 30 years. I'm like, great. Which would you rather do more of? Stretch, or not have to stretch at all and just be able to do it, or stretch for another 30 years and hopefully it works. It's like, well, obviously they're not having to stretch. I'm like, cool, great. Stretching is not mechanical for the most part. It's not that something is mechanically limited. The brain puts the brakes on, when it brings us full circle again back to what we were talking about earlier, based on perceived safety. That's it. So if I try and swing my arm back as far as I could and my brain wasn't involved, this is actually how I dislocated my hip. That's a whole different thing. Because I was literally asleep when it happened.
Oh, that's great.
When you try to swing your arm back and your brain didn't put the brakes on, you'd tear a bunch of shit, maybe break something. So your brain puts the brakes on via the Golgi tendon organ. It says, don't touch the hot stove. Okay? When a lot of people have muscular tightness, they actually have long, weak muscles. I use hamstrings as an example there because most, not all, people who have tight hamstrings actually have long, weak hamstrings. And that mother who couldn't touch her toes actually shortened her hamstrings to allow her to get further into her hamstrings, which sounds oxymoronic. But if the brain senses that the muscle is too long and further stretching puts it at risk of tear, it puts the brakes on and says, no more for you. Done. By shortening that muscle, then there is slack left. Then we can move throughout that motion. And that usually happens with appendicular structure movement, rib cage, pelvis, head. That's it. So you manage your pelvis, and immediately, this is why I like this stuff, immediately the change happens.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put it out there. The entire mobility industry is a fucking joke. And I'm sure I'm going to hurt someone's feelings with that. But if you can't make someone more mobile in 30 seconds, you probably can't make them more mobile. Now, again, we're accepting people with crazy neurological issues. But you've seen it when I work with people. You've seen me in person do it. Someone can't do it. And I don't tell them what to expect. I don't tell them, hey, you're going to have more rotation now. I go, what about now? They're like, oh, shit. I went from like nothing here to like, I got nice sweat patches too. That's fun.
Mm-hmm.
To like 90 degrees of humeral abduction. My shoulder just moves now. That's weird. I'm like, cool. Let it be weird. That's fine. Let it be novel. Live in that new weird thing. It does like this idea that we have to just stretch and stretch and stretch. And doing it before exercise is just fucking stupid too. Again, the research shows that it's going to reduce power output for the most part. There's also really not a whole large body of research showing any sort of benefits from it. If you like doing it, cool. But even if you are someone who loves to stretch, maybe don't do it so indiscriminately. Pick something that someone has helped you identify is actually tight.
Yes.
Stretch that. And then if we want that to stay off, this is the big one that screws people up, right? And again, we're going full circle, which I like. If I've had a problem with my laptop, my computer, and I reset it and turn it back on, and it's still there, do you think just keeping on resetting it is going to fix it? Despite what so many techs on the phone have tried to make me do for different issues. Like, if you just keep pressing reset, but never change anything in the software, never change anything in the hardware, nothing's going to happen. We're just going to end up with the same problem. So that's what most people are doing when they stretch. They're inhibiting a muscle, they're turning it off, lengthening it, taking leverage away. But if that muscle is not playing a role in the system, something else has to take up that slack, no pun intended. Something else has to take that job and do it. In the case of the hamstrings are long and weak. The low back will work for a lot of people. The low back is long and weak. The hamstrings will work. A lot less common, but it does happen. So we have to identify what the issue is, turn one off and the other one on. We have to give the brain an option if we want to self-organize. Never full circle. Mm-hmm. Self-organization needs input. It needs specific input. And then all of a sudden, oh shit, now that stretching actually can be beneficial because we've turned off the thing that was too on. Now we can turn on the new thing. Make sense? Mm-hmm. People are, I'm just going to stretch everything. I'm like,
right.
If you stretch everything, you may as well stretch nothing.
Yep.
Because you're kind of back to a net zero effect.
Totally. Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, 99.9% of people who are stretching, they're just like going through the motions of stretching every muscle equally, just doing things they've already seen, parroting it, and not helpful.
And if we look at it through the lens we talked about earlier, the binary phase, we're either moving towards stance, towards parasympathetics, or towards extension, swing, sympathetics. So if you stretch all the muscles in the articular chain that brings you towards one, and then the other, you're just net zero. Cool. You successfully wasted time is what you did. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm sure some of the mobility coaches are like, well, I find that I don't fucking care, right? Unless you have a mechanistic if you can get results better than 20 seconds or something like that, awesome. Now I want to hear from you. If you're like, well, my clients in 6 months, I'm like, shut the fuck up. I have no interest in that. No, I don't.
It's not practical.
I've been doing this long enough that I've been through all the phases of like, this is the new thing. There is no new thing. There's no shortcut to motor learning except for motor learning. There's no magic bullet. There's no one exercise that's going to fix your back pain because it depends why you have back pain. Mm-hmm. There is no one movement that's going to get you big arms. That'll be a function of consistency, same as anything else. Mm-hmm. You should be consistent and you should be a sniper. You should be surgical in what you do.
Absolutely. I'm actually super curious with regards to motor learning and like facilitating that process. An experiment I think that I mentioned to you before that I don't think any of us have done it yet. I was talking to Keith about doing it and maybe seeing how it works, but like using specific like pharmacological or small molecules to help facilitate motor learning. So like we know lion's mane helps with neurogenesis and like psilocybin helps with spine formation to make new connections between neurons.
I highly believe that there's a huge therapeutic potential for this. I also think that the converse, I think there's a lot of antidepressants and perhaps SSRI inhibitors and dopamine reuptake inhibitors. We talked about dopamine earlier and movement patterns. And dopamine reuptake inhibitors, which are probably negatively and detrimentally affecting people's ability to motor, particularly people with TBI. Again, I do not have clinical evidence for this. I do not have a research paper for this. This is just my own suspicion. I suspect they are dampening motor learning pretty significantly. Mm-hmm. I do have some very much anecdotal evidence, and it's a very small amount of it. but mechanistically, it does make a little bit of sense.
Yeah, there's probably also something with serotonin system, like you mentioned the SSRIs, but like just anecdotally, Keith, my partner, has had lots of issues with, different imbalances that he's worked with you with, and like pain in different areas. And we just noticed anecdotally that whenever we took MDMA in the past, like it's gone. Like he feels perfect. Like energy is just moving through his body very easily. There's no restriction, no pain. So it's super interesting. It's super interesting as well when people talk about this stuff to me. Like, and here's another one, by the way, I love to tell people that this is very much parallel to that. People talk about, well, what if someone has a mechanically excited muscle? It can happen, but it's usually not the case. Usually not. And the one I use all the time is, if you've ever been in an area where everyone's drinking or doing lots of drugs and there's no bathrooms around, and you see a girl just drop down to a full squat to pee, like at a festival or a car or whatever, ask the same girl to do it sober. Most of them can't do it because they're on depressants, which are depressing the nervous system to make them more sympathetic. Sorry, more parasympathetic. Not if you can inhibit those sympathetics, all of a sudden people can just move. I'm not saying everyone should be drunk all the time, but they might move depending on the level. They might move a little bit better. You know what I mean? I've seen it all the time. People, they can just like fold up in these positions like pretzels when they're drunk or when they're high. It doesn't matter really what it is, as long as it's a depressant. And then it's so rough they can't move like a brick. Wow, that's super interesting. There's also things like not alcohol, but like theanine, which is also GABAergic. So we could think about leveraging
magnesium.
Magnesium.
Enough magnesium, and you can get a mild buzz. I don't recommend it for many reasons. But people should be supplementing with magnesium, particularly before sleep. Very athletic. Totally. I use the magnesium bisglycinate and I swear by it. I love it. It helps me like throughout the day just feel like just more mellow. It's noticeable. So I think there's lots of potential here to like leverage specific, small molecules or supplements or pharmacologics that can really help facilitate the process in addition to doing the work, of course. Thankfully, / terribly, because there's money there, we're actually seeing some emerging research on the subject of MDMA and psilocybin and that sort of stuff. I'm not sure where it's going to go, if it's going to go in a positive direction, but we're going to find out. The ketamine as well. Yep. So it's super interesting. I think they're all pretty new, and like the research got squashed for so many years because of the war on drugs, but like we're starting to get new data now. And you look at all the conditions I was talking about treating, they're all conditions of hypersympathetics. Yeah. All of them. Like, it's almost as if being sympathetic all the time, and we talk about sympathetics being analogous to extension. It's almost, that's not a good thing. Yeah, we need to be able to go back and forth. If we're getting stuck in that pull, it's just going to be, I feel like that's what typically people describe as burnout. Yeah. Yep. Exactly that. Oh, and actually speaking of that, so I don't think we talked about this earlier, but I would really like to make sure that we cover it, is like nasal breathing versus mouth breathing and how that also plays into the whole sympathetic state. That's a long conversation in and of itself. Yeah. Which, I actually like on the notes we have mouth breathing changes the face shape, dental braces negatively impact the airway. Yeah, it does. Like, so let's start off chemically first. Nasal inhalation will, first of all, it will moisten and cool the air, number one. So it will filter the air for you, so you're going to have less environmental allergies. Also, it creates nitric oxide release as well. It also gives you a sense of inhalation, much more so than oral breathing. As it goes through the turbinate, the hairs of the nose and stuff will actually give a sense of inhalation if you don't get through the mouth. So that will typically help people not over inhale with the cadence, causing that cascade we talked about earlier. When you do that oral inhalation, it's a problem. It's a problem for so many people. I'm trying to figure out the easiest way to even talk about this. When we have someone who orally inhales, oh my God. There's enough data there. When you look at dentistry, mouth breathers suck. There's a reason mouth breathers is an insult, right? Like exactly. There is. It's associated with lower cognitive scores, lower emotional cognitive development. We'll have, typically you get like protruded mandibles, your retronathism they call it. You get crowding of teeth. You get palates that don't fully form, or they don't kind of spread out. You get narrow faces. And it's a good one. If you have someone who's had braces when they're younger, you see typically a narrow, long face. Not always, but it's a pretty good predictor for the most part. And when you restrict someone's teeth and mandible and palate from expanding and spreading, you'll often force crowding because the bones are already there. Now they have nowhere to go. And conversely, with someone who's prepubescent or sometimes mid-pubescent, if you can get them to start doing oral breathing, nasal breathing rather, not oral breathing, then you can often expand their palate far, like adult palate expansion doesn't really work. You can get some, but it's not the same thing at all. And anyone who says it is a liar. You can get some, but it's not the same thing. Because the sutures aren't fully formed and fully sealed pre-puberty. But if you get a kid to that, there's a great book. I think it's Mew Meets Buteyko.
Okay.
Or Buteyko Meets Mew. I think it's Mew Meets Buteyko. That people can actually look up and buy that. I don't agree with everything in it, but it's a very, very good book to start for people who have no clinical experience, no expertise in the subject, who have kids, who have environmental allergies, who have crowding of their teeth, who have narrow faces. There's a section for clinicians, a section for parents, and a section for kids. It's like a $10 or $11 book. And if you have kids who have environmental allergies, kids who are going to need braces or have been recommended palatal expansion, just get the book. It's $10.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it doesn't help you at all, it's $10.
Mm-hmm. And the narrow face and the palatal expansion also ties in with breastfeeding, right? As a baby.
Yep.
Yeah. So the absence of that can help, like, it facilitates that crowding process and the narrowing of the face and the airway, and that actually drives mouth breathing because now the nose doesn't have as much space to bring in air.
And on top of that, there's no, we haven't created a pattern where they need to mouth breathe as much.
Right.
Because literally in that position as you're breastfeeding, you kind of have to nose breathe.
Yeah.
So we're teaching them from a young age. It's an appropriate thing to be able to do.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's a long conversation. I could talk about it, but as someone who's really on the high end of dentistry, you'll be in a better position to kind of really dive in there. But if I see someone mouth breathing, but if you know someone who's in agriculture, they'll tell you they know their cattle are sick or their animals are sick when they're mouth breathing.
Yep.
Like it's a known thing from across the field. They'll be like, that one's sick, take it out. I'm showing my rural Irishness there. I couldn't own the farm.
Amazing. Yeah, and also so with the mouth breathing as well, like you talked about the Bohr effect and CO2 versus O2. Well, if you're mouth breathing, you're blowing off more CO2, so that ratio is changing, and you're creating that like mild alkalosis that's going to drive your sympathetic activity.
Yep, we'll also get like more SCM, much more SCM and upper trap activation typically on an oral inhalation, especially a forced one than a nasal inhalation.
Mm-hmm.
But it just drives not having a real sense of breath. The word sense to me is a very important word because I hate ambiguous hippie shit. I really do. But sensing is a skill. If you can't sense how much you're breathing, you're not good at breathing. And if you're not good at breathing, you're doing that 23,000 times a day. You're not really doing anything else other than beating your heart, which you don't really have conscious control over. If you're not breathing well, you're fucking up essentially your entire system.
Mm-hmm. Actually, to that end, maybe we should briefly discuss belly breathing because we mentioned it earlier. But I think it's been trendy over the past decade or so, and it's just very anti-productive in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I always struggle with this one because I don't want to shit on things that are well-intentioned.
Right, I totally get that.
And this is kind of where I'm like a very straight down the line person. You know this. I don't have a filter. Belly breathing is not good breathing. It contributes to a lot of the problems we've talked about. It contributes to the idea that we talked about earlier of the respiratory alkalosis. Mm-hmm. From a mechanical perspective as well, it's probably easiest to envision that. Belly breathing can be like when the diaphragm is partially coming down or the diaphragm is coming down but the pelvic floor is not. And what we have is an abdomen that's distending forward. That's a diaphragm that's pushing, or pressure that's pushing everything forward. Mm-hmm. Now, if we go back to our meat balloon analogy, if we have this expansion forward, we also have posterior compression. Anterior expansion, posterior compression, because every action is an equal but opposite reaction. So that's going to actually help drive you into that anterior pelvic tilt and that extension pattern, which feeds back the whole way into our whole conversation earlier. So belly breathing will make you worse at essentially everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. On top of that, I also suspect, I do not, again, have data for this, I suspect it also probably increases likelihood of anterior herniation and posterior herniation. Posterior herniation because we're getting a lot of direct compression there on every inhale, and anterior herniation because we're elongating the abdominal wall, the transverse abdominals, the internal obliques, the rectus, and then having outward pressure pushing from there as well. So I would be surprised if eventually we didn't find a correlation between things like umbilical hernias and elongated abdominal walls. I mean, again, from a very simple and obvious mechanistic analysis, it seems fairly related. Yeah,
that absolutely makes sense.
On that note, actually, my stepdad, so he's had pain. He's in his 60s now. He's awesome. He's had pain since his 20s in his low back. Been to see every person you can think of, like a couple of surgeries, all the physical therapy. And it's not me, again, ragging on physical therapists. They just weren't using the right tools at the time. They live in Spain, so I don't see them that often. I did one session with them like 3 or 4 years ago. No pain since.
Wow.
I saw him 2 years ago, and he mentioned he was going in for inguinal hernia surgery, groin hernia surgery. He had 4 failed surgeries, 2 on each side, and they'd recurred again. Now, I will state this. I wouldn't have done this if it was an actively protruding hernia. I ain't touching that shit with a barge pole, because we don't want to cinch that off and get some sort of necrosis. Whether or not that would happen, I don't know. But if it's an actively protruding hernia, I'm not touching with the barge pole, so it's at least internal again.
Yep.
Because you could cause a lot of problems. So neither of them were actually out, but they kept recurring. I said two failed surgeries each side, total 4 surgeries. So he happened to mention he was going in for the surgery in a couple of weeks. And I said, okay, Colin, don't call your doctor yet. Just come with me. We did 45 minutes of work. We're now 2 years later. Cancelled. No pain. Hernia is resolved.
Wow.
Now, this is not, oh my God, I'm a magician. This is saying that proper regulation of internal pressure can solve a lot of problems, or at the very least, improve them. That's it. That's why I care about breath. And people are like, oh, breathing's stupid. Don't be a nerd. It's always people, by the way, who have like room temperature IQs who say that shit. Yeah. People who have never read any literature, who are not interested in being the best at what they do. They should be like, get jacked, nerd. I'm like, first of all, I'm better than you at sports. Shut the fuck up. Second of all, help. If you're taking money from people to help them, fucking help them. That's it.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Grant. But yeah.
No, it's important, and it's very common that people aren't interested in continue learning, progressing with new evidence and data and being better.
Belly breathing, though, by the way, I will say it was a move in the right direction because we were talking about breathing.
Yeah.
Like we were talking about breathing. Great. We're starting to get there. I just don't love it for the reasons outlined. Again, it's still a step to even be thinking about breathing. But it's not necessarily a great step. It's at least we're stepped into the realm. We're not necessarily where we need to be with that.
Totally. So you talked about pressure generation and how important that is and pressure management for, massaging your internal organs and also just for, basic physiological functions of the body. And then, so speaking of that, there are certain movements presumably that can support that or kind of oppose that. And so I think that's where it's interesting to think about like unilateral movement when we're thinking about resistance training and how that can help support natural gait and pressure management.
I think it's important at this juncture to say that there is no bad position that a human can be in. There's bad positions to be stuck in, and there's inappropriate positions to load in. I think, I remember I had this conversation again with some of the people in the industry, and they said, well, it's generally accepted that you can't predict injury. And I said, that's fucking bullshit. You absolutely can predict injury. I also predicted the 2 injuries that person would have in the next year, almost to the month.
Wow.
I was very happy with that because I'm an asshole. That's called Schadenfreude. But it's not that we agree at all that you can't predict injury. It's that we disagree on the specificity with which we can predict injury. Everyone will say, okay, if I get Joe Normal to come into the gym and do bicep curls, we can't predict he's going to injure his back. Everyone go, yeah, we don't have enough information to say. All right, cool. What about if I have Joe Normal go and headbutt the wall every time he does bicep curls? Okay, we're going to say he's going to have an injury, some injury. Cool, everyone agrees there. So we've already established you can't predict injury. Let's be ridiculous about this. What about Joe Normal has a little bit of a swing in his curls? No, we can't necessarily say he's going to get injured. What about if Joe Normal is using weight way too heavy for him in a twisting, snapping motion? Almost every professional go, yeah, he's going to get hurt. The timeline, I don't know, but he's going to get hurt. So let's stop pretending we can't predict injury. Let's just on that. Where do we come from with that? Oh, the bilateral movements. Yeah, okay, cool. So when we look at bilateral movements, again, we're looking at the typical way they're taught is powerlifting methodology or bodybuilding methodology. Again, both fine sports in their own right, nothing to do with what everyone else is doing. I challenge someone to find me a single sport where they're going to squat like this with a big arch back. Find one sport other than powerlifting. You could say Olympic lifting, but no, they don't even squat like that. They squat differently. So, and don't say CrossFit, it's not a sport. It is, shut up, it's not a sport. CrossFit is a collection of games. Okay, it's a collection of sport-based games. That's all it is. It's not a distinct sport unto itself. Every other sport, you're going to come down a position where the pelvis is tucked under. We're going to load heels, then we're going to explode up. That's what we're going to do. We're going to do that in either a bilateral stance or an asymmetric stance. That's it. But either way, the idea that we should have a static position through a phased movement is fucking insane. Like, it's like if I got the shocks on my car and wedged them long, and then go, oh, why the shock breaks when I went up and down that mountain? Because you wedged them long, you dickhead. Of course they're going to break. Most people are wedging themselves long at all times. Now, when we're in a bilateral movement, we should have the ability to load and explode. Now, if I had a pair of dumbbells on my side, decided to squat down with a tucked pelvis, no big arch in the back, and then I jumped, when coming off the floor, you have to explode. You have to extend and find all these positions. That is a perfectly appropriate time to do that. Not when the 400 or 500 pounds is on your back or the heavy dumbbells in your hand. Now, there are times when it's appropriate to do that and have that extension pattern when you're on the ground as well, but not what most people think. It's usually not load bearing. It's not a load bearing position. It's that simple. We talk about sports. I'm trying to think the best way to do this. Again, we look at our binary of, are we load bearing? Are we swinging? We can take any single position. We could talk about, let's say baseball, right? Grab the ball to pitch. I load back here. Where's my leg? Where's my weight? Cool. It's on this side. Is my weight on this side? No. Is my ribcage decompressing this side, compressing this side? Sure. Cool. Stance, swing. As I come past here, this side compresses. I change load. This leg usually swings. Stance, swing. Beautiful. It's binary. Now we can break that binary down into as many fine slices as we want if we zoom in a little bit. But we can look at that as a binary. Same thing, say a bilateral bench press, right? We're going to do our big arch bench press here. Let's just talk about the range of motion. Well, I'm really displaying the pit stains there, but whatever. It's warm in here. Shut up. I chose gray. I was brave.
He's so brave.
So brave. Amazingly a hero. Fine. So barbell bench press, the main powerlifter will do it, okay? Again, perfectly fine for powerlifting. The goal is to lift the most weight possible and limit the range of motion we have to use within the rules, okay? For the average person, they're trying to either get stronger or look better naked, right? That's what it is. So that position puts us in a position where the humerus is behind us at a pretty nasty angle that a lot of powerlifters can't even go to on their own. And it puts the pec in a very long position, okay? Very long position and a lot of load is a great recipe for a torn pec, especially when we're talking about 1 rep maxes or close. For the general pop, we want the highest reward to the lowest risk strategy and one that will have the most crossover because they have an undefined long-term athletic goal. I want you to be able to go and do what the hell you want to do. If you're a professional athlete in one discipline, we're probably going to lean into that discipline a lot and then try not get you hurt. For general pop, I want you to look good naked and be good at stuff. That's it. Whatever stuff you want to be good at. That means we have to preserve and develop those abilities to get through those movements. So let's say our barbell bench press. Cool. That big extension pattern we talked about earlier, you're just reinforcing that. That's why they all walk around in that big extension pattern and they all have tons of disc issues and pain. That and the huge loads they use, obviously, as well. So let's say we get rid of the arch, took the pelvis, put the heels up on a bench. Cool. Now we've got a significantly greater range of motion. We've pretty much double the range of motion. So we're probably going to have a lower necessary weight. So probably injury risk is going to be down. But in terms of mechanical load, we can actually up the rep range now, and we're upping the range of motion. So your ego might get hurt, but you're still going to get great stimulation. And it's probably going to have a much bigger crossover into actual athletics because we're going through the full range. If you shove somebody, for example, you don't go, they wouldn't go very far. They go like 2 foot. Like, what are you fucking doing? You have to get into the position, then unload. You know what I mean? Flexion, extension, coil the spring, explode the spring. Powerlifting doesn't do the coiling part. And now I'm not saying someone should drop and go. That's a whole different level of stupid. What we can do is the alternating movements. And an alternating, I would say there's a difference in alternating and alternating reciprocal, and I sometimes use them interchangeably. So alternating could be I hold one dumbbell here. If you guys can't see because you're just listening, I'm holding one dumbbell, I move the other arm and press, then I start moving the other one. That's an alternating movement. I really want alternating reciprocal movement. As you do one action with one arm, the other arm does the opposite action. Because that's what happens. We looked at a baseball pitch earlier. As one arm winds back into humeral abduction behind me, the other arm comes towards the front into humeral adduction. As this pelvis tucks under, this semi-pelvis tucks under, the other one tucks forward. As one posterior tilts, the other anterior tilts. That's what happens in gait. That's what happens in athletic movement. That's what happens in every sporting movement that's actually a decent movement. And we can break down, again, every sporting movement into phases of gait when it actually happens and train those. That's a different conversation. But what we want to do there is we want to have them doing both ends of the motion. And again, there is an appropriate way to do it and an inappropriate way to do it. If I bring the dumbbell down to my side, am I overcoming the load or am I accepting the load? I'm accepting it. I'm not trying to overcome it as I bring it to my side. That's compression. That's stance. It's parasympathetic. I said it's parasympathetics. As I drive it up and bring the other one down, that side is being involved in sympathetics. Cool. We're also literally, if you look at it, we're pumping a rib cage, pumping a pelvis, pumping a cranium. That's what we're doing. We're pumping. We're alternating. We're wobbling. We're oscillating. What the fuck you want to call it? We're giving ourselves variability, and we're going through it in a way that is directly comparable to the force vectors that we'll use in athletic activity, which is not the same thing you can say for regular gym training.
Totally. I mean, it will just reinforce proper or more efficient and functional human movement.
Well, you know what's really cool about it, actually, right, is a lot of my clients hated the first 2 weeks. They're like, this is awkward and it's pedantic and it's weird and it's different. And why does nobody else do it this way? And 2 or 3 months, they're like, holy shit, I'm 30-40% stronger in every, I know you know this.
Yes,
30-40% stronger in every lift.
Mm-hmm.
Every lift. And it's like, that's a couple of years of gains for most people. And you get a couple of months. And the ceiling just doesn't come. You can keep going and going and going and going and going and going for such a long time. Everyone always asks me how I dip with the 200 pounds. Like, a video of me a while back, like dipping with 200 pounds on me for like 10, 12 reps.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's like, what the hell? And it's like, I just relearned my dips all over again, started at body weight, and just kept going and going and going and going. My training partner got up to like, I think 100 pounds for 8 or 10. And he was, struggling to do, he's a strong guy, but he could struggling to do like 30, 40 for 4 or 5 before that. But when he went back to scratch and relearned with better position, better form, I mean, the ceiling just isn't really there. It's just a slower ascent once you get quite strong. Now, on top of that, you'll have people talk about, well, we got these form Nazis, where to go with this one? This is going to hurt someone's feelings again. They're like, if you're not cheating, you're not trying hard enough. How about you're a fucking idiot? When we have a particular form to do any given exercise, now this is different when we talk about in competition. In competition, things change. I don't give a shit. Win. You're in competition to win. Win and be safe. That's it. Outside of competition, in training, what we're trying to do is push the level at which we can perform before we have form breakdown. Because when we have optimal form, we have, given what we talked about earlier, if the technique is good, we have optimal power transfer and efficiency. If we don't, we don't. That's simple. So if it's most competitions, we want to be as efficient as possible and safe as possible. When we have inefficient power transfer, we usually also have unsafe power transfer. We're talking about near maximal levels. From a very simple fucking perspective, if we're trying to train biceps and you're swinging like a motherfucker, you're not training your bicep anymore.
Right.
So the targeted tissue is no longer getting targeted. So why the fuck are you doing it? Just stop. There is an argument to be made for stopping if your goal is hypertrophy of size gain or strength, and you're an advanced or moderately advanced trainee. There is a decent argument to be made. I know this will definitely annoy somebody, to stop as soon as the set slows down.
Okay.
Particularly if you're in season or if you're doing your S&C work on top of like a sports specific work. I'm talking about for fighters, especially that sort of stuff. Your type 2 muscle fibers, your fast twitch fibers, the most metabolically expensive and the most susceptible to fatigue. So when you slow down, the fibers that you're targeting are the ones that are done.
Right.
So if you're going to grinded reps, all you're doing is depressing the shit of your CNS, and you're using the muscle mass that's not going to grow, that's not going to significantly contribute to force output at a later date, or high-end output, which is what most people are going to need. There's, again, depending on the sport, there is a case to be made for doing those grind reps.
Mm-hmm.
But for most people, even training to failure is a waste of time. No pain, no gain. Fuck that. I want as much gain with as little pain as possible. I want to be efficient. I think anybody with half a brain wants to be efficient. Some people crave that beaten up feeling. I suspect part of the reason for that is they're so sympathetic. The only way to get parasympathetic is by beating the nervous system into submission.
Well, that's a good point. Then they can give themselves the excuse to rest.
Yes,
afterwards.
Exactly. And physiologically, they have to, because the
Yes.
CNS can't maintain sympathetic. They're done.
Yes, actually, that was something that I really learned from you and I enjoyed when you started doing my programming, was that prior to that, I was more so going to failure and doing more high load training. And then we switched up to a more high volume training style and always ending with like 2 to 3 reps left in the tank. And I basically had no soreness. I could work out virtually every day. And
you get stronger, you get good results.
Yes.
With way less emotional cognitive load. You don't leave the gym exhausted. You go, oh, it's kind of fun. I feel like you could do more.
Yeah,
good.
Totally.
Do more tomorrow. We look at like the hypertrophy stats again and the studies on it. 3-4 times a week is typically the optimal amount of time for a muscle to be stimulated for hypertrophy.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're talking about someone who's going to the max on every session, you can't do that. It's not possible. And then people are taking their cues from PED using performance enhancing drug using bodybuilders.
Mm-hmm.
You're not a performance enhancing, if you're not using drugs, that's not going to work for you. And we have some data to suggest that most bodybuilders are successful in spite of what they do, not because of it.
Totally.
And I have trained, apart from having my own competition experience, I have trained competitive bodybuilders before as well, if someone wants to know about that.
Yeah, the crazy thing about the PEDs is that I mean, people
They
associate
work no
it
matter
with,
what you do.
yes,
Yeah.
but also it's like you're gaining strength, but also the recovery is enhanced insanely.
Oh my God, yeah.
So it's like that's
including your CNS.
yes, exactly. So that's a major benefit that those people are having that you're just not going to get that effect if you're just going in drugless.
And this is also no judgment on PEDs. I really don't give a shit if someone uses PEDs. I've trained a lot of athletes who use PEDs, a lot of athletes who don't use PEDs, especially obviously the bodybuilders and powerlifters, a lot of those who use PEDs because they don't test. But you have, here's the thing that nobody talks about. So the androgen receptors in the body tend to be a little bit higher the higher up we are. Talk about upper traps and shoulders. If you look at every juice head, you're going to see a lot big upper traps, big capped medial delta, especially is the big giveaway. Fantastic. So if you're using those upper traps and SEMs for respiration, you're going to get a lot of hypertrophy there. And it's going to make getting out of that state, that high stress state, out of those sympathetics, even harder for you. Even harder. Because the one muscle we don't want to hypertrophy, that upper trap, obviously for aesthetic purposes, you may want to hypertrophy it. But for breathing purposes, we don't want that to be taking over instead of the diaphragm. We've just given that carte blanche space to get as big as it can. And now we've really fucked ourselves.
That makes a lot of sense because, I mean, neurologically speaking, the more, so the saying is like neurons that fire together wire together, but the more frequently and often those neurons are firing together, the more ingrained they get into the system and the harder it is to divert to a new pattern.
Yep.
And so when you're using the PEDs, very high loads and like a lot of like more threatening environments, then that's going to really lock those patterns in and make it very challenging.
Add to that the rampant stimulant use, whether legal or otherwise.
Yes.
Like the recipe for fucking disaster. That's why I do rehab with a lot of bodybuilders. I told you I had a guy who's like 270 pounds, like jacked beyond belief. Couldn't do a 5-pound tricep extension because the long head of his tricep was so used to just being assisted by the other parts of the tricep. And he couldn't depress the scapula whatsoever to save his life. He was almost having a seizure doing it. It was amazing.
Wow.
He had a full-on tantrum. Talk about perceived threat. He took the little ball we were using between his knees, threw it across the room and stormed out. Came back 5 minutes later looking like he cried. That's how much perceived threat.
Yeah.
I have people do breathing exercise sometimes and they will do everything but shut the fuck up and do it because their body is screaming at them, don't do this. And then they need it more than anything. They need to step outside that comfort zone, but the body doesn't want to do it yet.
Mm-hmm. There's like an interesting parallel here too between like learning and memory in general and also how it relates to like the peripheral nervous system. But like, so we know that during sleep, learning and memory is where like, that's where most of that is happening. That's when you're most parasympathetic throughout the day. And if you're using a lot of stimulants or abusing stimulants, caffeine, Adderall, nicotine, whatever it is, you're going to be stuck more in that sympathetic branch of the nervous system and unable to have the motor learning and have the neurogenesis and the new connections to be made.
Yep. You'll be an unhappy person. And if you're sitting here listening to this saying, I'm not an unhappy person, okay, but you could be happier. Like, sorry, you're not a unicorn.
Totally. I think people at this point will probably be really curious what offerings you have and like how to work with you or what
you mean like the 5% of people I haven't insulted throughout this. I apologize.
Unicorns who are left here. I want to know, how do I work with Rua?
It's very, I'm not gonna lie, it's very difficult to work with me in person nowadays because I primarily work from home in New Jersey. And I'm almost booked up entirely for in-person. So I only do in-person for rehab nowadays, or if it's a like professional athlete referral. And even then they have to know somebody I've worked with because it's too busy and I can't take everybody else on. But what I do have is I have my Infinite Athlete program, which is based around all these principles that we've just talked about. But it's broken down to very simple bite-sized stuff. There's like a lot of interaction. There's Q&As. We go through it all. There's video technique. There's no like live one-on-one except for the Q&As. Basically what it is, it's obviously a lot cheaper than working with me one-on-one. But you're in a small group of people. We've got private groups who discuss this stuff. We break it down. Everyone has their program, their goal, their diet, their help to all these things. And everyone's getting great results from it. They're all loving it so far. And I'm actually really enjoying it because some of the questions that come out in these live Q&As are just beautiful. If people don't make it to live Q&As as well, they can like pre-submit questions, catch the replays and stuff. But yeah, it's a really nice group of people, really supportive. And it's kind of cool seeing how they're all like growing and getting better at everything. It's very rewarding. But yeah, I honestly, I've been like kind of beta testing this since before COVID. So it's like 3.5, 4 years I started online training. And I didn't want to talk much about it until I had something that I could be proud of. So I went back to the drawing board like 6 times. And finally this year I was like, okay, well, it's time to put something out there that people want access to this level of integration of this sort of work into training. but also don't want to dive too deep into it on a professional level, because there's so many different facets to this, obviously, as we just talked about. But they can go and just sign up, and then I can take care of it for them. I work with them. So
that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, ever since I started working with you, I was thinking about like, how can this be scaled, and how can you affect as many people as possible, because your work is so transformative and important. And so I'm so happy you have a group container now. And I also have a couple clients who joined, and
they're awesome.
they're giving glowing reviews. So it seems like a really awesome program. People can find that. Do you have a website, or can they find it on Instagram?
They can find me on Instagram at the Biomechanist. And they can find me at my website, BUA, BUA, fitness.com. Everyone always asks, why is it BUA, not Rua? And then if people email me, call me BUA. So BUA is the Irish word for victory.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. Amazing.
And obviously Rua is my name, but yeah, BUA is the Irish word for victory. Obviously, for me, it's like, well, I speak Irish as well. So I'm like, it didn't even occur to me, like, oh, Rua, BUA, people are going to get confused.
Oh, yeah, like, I always wondered.
They do all the time, yeah. All the time.
That's amazing.
I'm also going to start actually this or next week my YouTube channel, which is a little bit more long form content, which is called The Infinite Athlete. Which
incredible.
It's primarily going to be just this sort of stuff. It's not going to be me going on my 1 hour long rants about shit that I don't like. It's going to be practical, helpful stuff, and maybe some in-depth analysis of why things should be on a certain way and not the other.
Incredible. And are you at Bua Fitness on YouTube as well?
I am, yeah. But on that one, it's not really worth visiting me. Cool. Like that Bua Fitness on my YouTube is, I have like maybe 1 or 2 videos there. There is one video there that a lot of people would like, but most of it there is private. And it's all the private videos for my online clients in that Infinite Athlete group.
Got it. So if people follow you there, they should expect some more long form stuff coming soon in the next few weeks.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Great. So, I mean, we covered a lot of ground. Is there anything else anything final that you want to share? Or
I would say the big thing is, let's go back to, we'll call it the Sarah principle and pretend like it didn't say the person's real name.
Never happened.
Just don't put limitations on yourself in anything, in relationships, in finances, in fitness, in life. Anything another human being can do, you're 99.999% same as everybody else. And that's not a bad thing. Everyone thinks, oh my God, I'm the same, not a special, unique individual snowflake. No, it means that anything somebody else did, that you can also do it. So believe in yourself and don't give up. And I mean that, like, I especially say that to my rehab people, like, because having been through that road of being dysregulated, being in pain, having joint injuries, not being able to perform at sports, it really is transformative in a very negative way when that's taken away from you. When people don't believe that you can be better, you can be back to yourself again. And when that is possible to get there, and you can get your life back. So don't give up on that either.
Amazing. On that note, I want to thank Rua so much for being here. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and we'll be back next week with a new guest. So have a good one. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.